Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Sound Sensory Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Prologue, Song Scarred Soul. Patient. Midoriya Izuku. Quirk. Soul Song. Can hear the manifestation of a person's health and experiences in musical form. Izuku frowned down at his notebook. It had been there all day, empty and staring back at him. If it were any other notebook, the page would have been filled in a few minutes at most, but this notebook was mostly empty. Each page held only a few words at the top and a single bullet point. He sighed and shut the notebook when the teacher entered the room. Whatever the teacher started off with was lost on Izuku as he glared down at the closed book. But you're all going into the hero course anyways. And you have such fabulous quirks, but no using them in school. Izuku leaned over his desk, hands over his ears. The music played, regardless of his hearing, but he still tried every time. With everyone showing off, their songs had risen to a fever pitch out of nowhere. Sensei! Izuku groaned. Bakugo's song killed the rest with a long, low note, then rumbled to life as if to fill the space they left behind. Don't lump me in with these extras. Bakugo Katsuki was all deep, intimidating notes. His song played like the slow march of a breaking storm. He lorded himself over them, threatening but not dangerous yet. A bolt of lightning rang in the music when he leapt onto his desk and began his monologue. Izuku's eyes widened as he heard something ominous in his own song, and he cowered in his seat as it grew louder. Aren't you also going to Yui Midoriya? Bakugo's music stopped. Izuku sighed as a sad note began to peel out through the room. The class promptly burst into laughter. The walk home was long and dreary. It took all his mental effort to silence his song, just so that he could have a moment's peace. He didn't need the melancholy background noise to tell him that he was feeling depressed. If you think you'll have a better quirk in your next life, go take a swan dive off the roof. Izuku's quirk came with a lot of benefits. Knowing how a person was feeling and the depth of someone's emotions, having a few moments, in the case of anything significant, to react before bad things happened, lie detection. Izuku wished more than anything that he didn't know Bakugo's feelings. Hate wasn't the right word. Bakugo didn't hate people. He was determined to grind Izuku into dust through sheer force of pride, just in case people dared to compare them. Izuku stopped in front of the bridge and glared at the pavement. A distant memory played through his mind, playing a deep melancholy sound in between the notes of his song. I'm sorry, Izuku. I'm so sorry. I decided back then to keep my chin up, keep moving forward. He stormed into the tunnel, letting his song slowly rise until it matched his determination. Halfway down the tunnel, he heard another song slithering through the tunnel, just before his own music changed into something ominous. Without that half-second of warning, he'd have been caught in the arms of the slime. Hey, you're pretty good? How'd you know I was here? A chuckle echoed from the tunnel as Izuku backed into the sunlight. I don't have time to talk, actually. I'll figure your quirk out for myself. The slime grunted in surprise when Izuku dodged the next tentacle, and then growled when he managed to dodge the third swipe. Stay still. Izuku tripped and fell, eyes widening as the music darkened. Just before the slime reached him, something new assaulted his ears. A bell suddenly rang through the air. Izuku watched wide-eyed as a manhole cover hit the street, and the owner of the new song emerged from the sewer. A drumroll echoed through the street until Izuku was sure that everyone would be able to hear this song. If Bakugo's song was all pride and intimidation, this one roared defiance and tugged at something deep inside of Izuku, as if it were pulling him into the music and grinning ear to ear all the while. A man in cargo pants and a tight white shirt crawled out of the sewer, laughing as he entered the fray. Fear not. Izuku's eyes widened. He'd never heard this song in person, but sometimes, if he talked to the right people, he had heard traces of it. It echoed, even when someone had only seen the owner. I am here. The sludge villain tried to fight, but Izuku could tell there was no point. Heart's songs never lied, and he was afraid of the giant man who had crawled out of the sewer. A blast of wind tore out of the tunnel, scattering the sludge and leaving Izuku in even more awe than before. He stared as All Might zipped by, scooping up the slime in soda bottles before nodding to himself and turning to Izuku. "Sorry for getting you caught up in that, young man. He got away from me in the sewers." All Might laughed, and his song rose to accompany him. Izuku's eyes widened as the hero spoke. "Young man? Young man, are you all right?" Izuku blushed. He'd been so wrapped up in the music. "So sorry. I didn't mean." "No worries." All Might laughed again, but instead of rising, the music scratched. Izuku's eyes widened again, only to turn his eyes to the sidewalk as quickly as possible. When he focused on it, he could hear something odd about All Might's song. "Is there anything I can do for you, young man? Were you harmed?" Heard him coming. Izuku mumbled. All Might nodded and tucked the bottles into his pocket. Izuku shut his eyes as the wind kicked up, then flinched as All Might opened up his notebook. "Ah no." All Might paused with the marker just a millimeter from the page. Sorry, but could you sign this one?" Izuku hesitantly asked as he pulled Hero Analysis 13 from his bag and tentatively held it out. All Might nodded, handing both back to him. "Of course. Is there something special about that empty notebook?" Izuku stared at the autograph for a moment before he closed the book and looked at his empty heart song journal. "My quirk lets me hear music. I've been trying to put it into words, but it's hard to describe a person's song." "I see. That's an interesting quirk. And that other one, Hero Analysis for the Future, was it? Are you planning to be a hero?" Izuku hesitated and turned his ear to the right. He could almost. "Young man? Are you right? Did you get hurt?" All Might froze. His music slowed and trailed off, replaced by something Izuku could only describe as quiet dread. "Come again." Izuku's eyes widened. He'd done this before. Mom had always warned him about asking things like that, about people's privacy and how sometimes it was better to keep quiet. "Sorry, I shouldn't ask, but your side." Izuku glanced at All Might's right side and shuddered. "I wasn't sure at first, but now I can tell, it's definitely coming from your side. You're hurt, right?" All Might's music changed slowly. Izuku was only just now hearing the dissonance between the two sounds, and it was odd. As if the first song was fighting against the second, trying to drown it out. His first song was full of gravity and sunshine and people cheering, of victory and the wind in his hair. The second song was tired and plucky with long notes and worn instruments. The longer the first song tried to drown out the second, the more it began to fail. Izuku's eyes widened as it missed first one note, then another. All Might. All Might stared at him as if he'd stumbled upon something horrible. For a moment, the smile looked more like a marble sculpture than All Might's signature grin. Before he could ask, the hero laughed again and spun around. "Nonsense, my boy. I ended that fight in a single blow. Honestly, I'm not that old." Another laugh echoed down the street. All Might crouched and bounced on his heels. "Ah, wait, All Might something. A pro-hero battles not only enemies, but also time." Izuku was moving before he could think. "Thanks for your support." All Might shouted and leapt in the same motion, dragging Izuku into the air. Somewhere in the middle of their flight, a trumpet pealed. "That was too dangerous, young man. You could have been seriously injured." All Might huffed. Izuku and his music both wheezed as he got his breath back. But. No buts." Izuku's teeth ground together as the tug-of-war between All Might's songs grew worse. Even his normal, bright song was groaning under the strain. "You can't. If you leave now." All Might glared back over his shoulder, and suddenly his song snapped. Izuku screamed at the noise, watching in terror as All Might began steaming and cursing himself under his breath. The second song quieted down as the steam grew to cover him, and then, All Might. Izuku stared at the gaunt man left standing on the rooftop. He couldn't believe that this was All Might, but this music was definitely coming from his side, same as it had before. "Calm down, kid." A fountain of blood poured from the man's mouth. "I'm All Might, there's no need to scream." B. The man sighed as Izuku covered his mouth, if only to stop the stuttering. Geez, you're something else. No point in fighting now. All Might slumped down against the railing. How'd you know about my side? Izuku had to peel his hands from his mouth, and his voice was weak when he did. The music. Your song changed, and there's something coming from your side. My song changed? All Might stared at him in disbelief. Izuku sighed, then took a step forward. I see, can show you? All Might watched him carefully, but when Izuku extended a hand, he took it. Izuku chewed his lip for a moment, then took a breath and pulled All Might's song out and played it aloud. All Might's eyes widened in shock and Izuku smiled a bit. Your side? Izuku frowned and reached a little deeper, trying to be as delicate as possible as he pulled out the broken instrument. All Might frowned when he heard the discord in the song. After a minute or so, Izuku released All Might's hand and gripped his backpack until his hands hurt. Everyone has a song. They're all different, and it changes every single day. It sounds like someone who's wounded or sick. That's a very odd quirk. All Might coughed. I can see how you'd have trouble putting it into words. I doubt I could make sense of it at all. Izuku bit his cheek. He wanted to say something, but he waited instead. All Might sighed when he realized what Izuku was waiting for. 5 years ago, I was wounded in a fight with a villain, Izuku hissed as All Might pulled up his shirt to reveal the scar. I've kept it out of the media, but I'm only able to work about 3 hours a day. The damage and the surgeries were extensive. But I'm the symbol of peace. Izuku wasn't surprised to hear All Might's theme play faintly behind the rueful song his injury gave off. For a moment it seemed like All Might's eyes were glowing. I will not be stopped by something like this. Izuku believed him. Was there anything else you needed, young man? All Might groaned as he stood up. Izuku hesitated, but in the end he'd pushed it down too long. Do you think I can be a hero? Izuku asked as All Might stared at him blankly for a moment. I've always had this dream, to be a hero, like you, fearlessly saving everyone with a smile. But everyone says I can't do it. Silence stretched out between them, All Might staring down at him and Izuku looking at All Might's feet. After a few moments, Izuku could guess what was coming. All Might's song grew so stressed that it hurt his ears. His own song died quietly, leaving him alone in the face of All Might's answer. I'm sorry, young man, All Might sighed. Heroes must put their lives on the line every day. With a quirk like yours, you could surely help people. But a hero? That may be a bit too far. I cannot ask someone to put their lives on the line for a dream like that. A single, mournful chime rang inside Izuku's chest. I do not think you can be a hero. Izuku couldn't remember the last time he was able to walk without forcing his quirk to be silent. He wondered if All Might had killed his quirk along with his dreams, but that wasn't quite right. He glanced up when he heard the shout, scowling as he realized that he'd walked to the scene of a crime without paying attention. Explosions and fire rang out from the other side of the crowd. Considering the number of people between Izuku and the fight, it wasn't surprising that he couldn't hear the songs. Large groups of people were harder to sort through. Songs floated at the edge of his mind like static, waiting for him to poke through and find whichever he wanted to listen to. After a few minutes of dejectedly staring at the crowd, he stopped fighting. He crossed the street and stumbled along the back of the crowd till Izuku choked when he saw the broad, inhuman grin lacing the slime. Behind the smile was a person, struggling against the grip. Without meaning to, he started picking up on the conversations in the crowd. A few minutes. I barely survived 1 minute. How could someone? When he locked eyes with the victim, his body moved. Toshinori stared at the burning alley and the slime villain within. He watched as the heroes were fended off by the boy's quirk even as the school kid tried fighting back. Even if they wanted to, no one on the scene knew how to handle a situation like that. It was a no-win scenario for most. If only I hadn't stalled with that kid. Toshinori gripped his side as he listened to the crowd talk about All Might. His hand tightened painfully around his scar when they asked where he was, whether or not the villain had gotten away. I'm pathetic. How could I? Toshinori's eyes widened when he heard the music. It came from nowhere and everywhere, as if someone had plugged in speakers and begun blasting the song through the alley. At first it was muted and uncertain and full of despair. Then the strings faded and gave way to a steady beat. The crowd watched as the boy took off running into the alley, and Toshinori spewed blood at the sight. As the boy ran, the music grew louder. People screamed, the heroes lunged, and Toshinori felt time slow to a crawl. For a moment, the music slowed and the screams of the people died away, and Toshinori may as well have been right beside them to hear the first boy say, "You looked like you needed saving." Toshinori felt something well up inside of him. He felt the music pulling at him. The music didn't thunder along with his heart or shake him to the core with its metal. Despite the volume, it felt quiet. A gentle push on the back. Eyes turned on the horizon, and the dream waiting there. Feet planted firmly on the ground, moving forward faster and faster until he was running. A reminder of who he was. A reminder of where he had started. One for all burned when he seized the guttering flame and began to swell in spite of its sputtering. The music changed until it was something more familiar, yet alien all the same. If the first had been young and optimistic, this one laughed and charged forward, pushing back fear and doubt through sheer force of will. He felt the sun on his face and the wind in his hair, and even while his body burned and fought against him, the music made him feel alive. The lesson I left you with? I should practice what I preach. He seized the boys just before the slime could hit them and drew back his left fist. A pro should always be ready to risk his life. When it was over, as the police collected the slime and people cheered and talked about the weather, All Might heard the music begin to fade. The song took the feeling with it, leaving him with the unpleasant sensation of holding his muscle form for too long. He watched as the boys were lectured and praised respectively, and his eyes lingered more on the smaller boy. Toshinori had traveled the world over and he'd seen plenty of odd quirks. When he'd been in the hospitals, there were several empathy quirks and endorphin quirks. Mind quirks were rare, music quirks were uncommon, sensory quirks were usually unique and almost always strange unless they were simple voice quirks. He wanted to say that it was the boy's quirk that inspired him. The music had been beyond him. No words could describe it. Only feelings could come close. Music, ordinary music, did not reach into a person and shake them to their core, or fill them with so much passion. Toshinori didn't know what to think of it. He decided it was the boy's actions that had inspired him and turned back to the reporters. Bakugo's song had lost its thunder. It struggled to keep up as the boy walked away. Seeing Bakugo like that made Izuku sad, even if Bakugo was right in the end. He recognized the tune coming from the alley before he reached it and paused. All Might's music had been exhilarating before, but it was more subdued now. Izuku pinched his lip, then smiled. It still sounded like victory. Izuku hid his smile when All Might slid into the street and posed dramatically. With a painful screech, All Might's song caved, giving way to the trudging tune of his secret form. Not 10 minutes later, he made a deal with All Might, completely unaware that he was projecting his song aloud as he walked home. "Mom, what song are you playing?" Inko glanced over at Izuku. His eyes were wide for a boy of 4 years old. Wide and curious and sparkling. "Music? I'm not playing any music, Izuku." She had looked away from the dishes and watched him tilt his head to the side. "Where's that sound coming from then?" "What sound?" "The music." Looking back at him, she smiled. He had looked as sure as only a child could. At the time, though, she'd been. "Izuku, playing tricks isn't nice." "But Mom, I'm not." "Hush now and finish your homework." Her quirk was practical. Nothing flashy or extraordinary, but useful. Hisashi, for all the strength of his quirk, had never been anything but ordinary. When he was 4.5 without one of their quirks, Inko started paying a bit more attention. He was 6 when he learned how to project. They had seen enough doctors and been through enough exams to know he had a quirk. Each doctor had a different opinion, and they were all at least a little bit right. Izuku's quirk was sensory. Izuku's quirk seemed to be mostly invisible. Izuku's quirk may affect other people in some small way. Given Inko's quirk, she never let on how that last one stung. Izuku had been so excited that day, though he wouldn't say why. He'd come home bruised and scuffed up again, but young boys were just like that, weren't they? She patched him up and smiled gently as he bounced in the chair. When she'd asked, he simply beamed the widest smile she'd ever seen, ignoring those times he tried to rival All Might, and said he'd gotten her a present. I want to show you a song. It's the best song in the whole world. Of course his giddiness was contagious, and they were planning on going to her favorite little cafe for dinner, so she let him keep his secret. They dressed up and left around 7. After the meal was over, he'd gotten serious. Mom, can you hold my hand? I think I need to touch you. She'd been confused, but she'd reached across the table. When he took her hand, his face scrunched up. The sound was slow and quiet. Not difficult to hear, but quiet. Strings sang like ocean waves and the wind on an early summer's breeze. A steady, somber beat padded along beneath humming woods and an occasional ring of wind chimes. It sounded like candlelight on the beach the first time Hisashi had kissed her and the way she'd cried when they first held Izuku and made her feel as warm as she'd felt when she his smile earlier that evening. Izuku, what? Izuku beamed. It's your song, Mum. The best song in the whole world. That memory, no matter how many years passed, made her throat hurt and her chest tighten. After that, they talked about his quirk. She learned of all the years she'd missed with his quirk, telling him that he was just imagining things. He told her of all his times trying to understand the songs, trying to show people or put it to words. She'd laughed when he talked about trying to learn some bigger words to fit the songs, only to learn that the kanji themselves also had songs, and those were even stranger than a person's song. After that, she'd watched as he took off learning about his quirk. Staring at his back as he went made the ache in her chest worse every time he learned something new. Because, even if his quirk was something amazing and indescribable and beyond her, something plagued her. Something dark and nauseating permeated every new discovery and little moment that he told her about. It infected every time he wanted to show her a song, every time he asked her for help. Deep down, she knew his quirk wouldn't make him a hero. Sometimes after he went to sleep, she wondered if not telling him was worse than letting him try. She wasn't sure what had changed. He'd come home after the Mudman incident with that old spark in his eyes. It reminded her of the day he'd showed her her song, and that cut deeper than any knife. He didn't tell her about his day. Instead, they talked about the incident, and he went to bed early. She heard him slip out early the next morning, and she was waiting when he came back sweaty and exhausted. They didn't talk much after that, except when he asked for a few things. Dumbbells, some track suits, a different diet. He ate more and talked less. She watched him walk through the house like a zombie and work out even when it looked like he was ready to cry. She asked a few of her friends what she should make of it, and they weren't entirely sure what to think either. Just let him be. Even if he can't be a hero, it's good for him, you know? It sounds like he's working hard. Inko knew better. Izuku always worked hard. He confirmed her worst fears months later, when she found the application pages among his homework. She'd pulled it out of the pile without even thinking and stared as he did push-ups in front of the television. Why are you doing this, Izuku? He came to her a week before the exam, looking conflicted. You already know, don't you? She chewed her lip. I saw the application. Would you rather I don't try? Izuku, not if that's what you want. I'm just worried for you. The talk was short, and they hadn't spent much time together afterward. He was studying in his room, and she was staring at the reflection in the silent television screen. She wondered what he had been expecting. Why had he asked her that? For all the years since that night at the cafe, she'd listened to him talk about his quirk. Suddenly she felt like it all hit her at once. Izuku wouldn't look at her, but she realized that he didn't have to. He could hear every word, every thought, because they were woven into her song. Ever since she'd picked the app from his homework, he knew that she was worrying. He'd always known. It took everything she had not to break, because she might have broken her son. She woke up the next morning, tired, nursing a raspy voice, tucked into bed with no memory of getting there herself. Izuku didn't avoid her eyes, but he was quicker than usual on his way out the door. As he made his way to school, Inko sat at the table and thought. When she finally got up, she decided that, if he was determined to be a hero, then she would match his determination. He needed a mother who could support his dream, no matter what. She would be that for him, no matter what. When they'd begun, 10 months ago, Toshinori hadn't known much about Midoriya. Really, he'd known only 2 things for sure. First, Midoriya had a sensory quirk that manifested as music, for lack of a better term. Second, he'd thrown his useless self into a no-win scenario on pure instinct. Slowly, over the course of their training, Toshinori's curiosity had gotten the better of him. He was raising a successor, after all. Even if he was to die along the way, he wanted to know who Midoriya was beneath all the fidgeting and the muttering and the odd way he looked at people. Well, that's how he thought about it anyway. He started slow and asked about Midoriya's quirk. Midoriya gave him the name and a short description. My quirk is called, Soul Song. I can hear the manifestation of a person's health and experiences in musical form. Toshinori had hummed and thought nothing of it until that evening, when he couldn't stop thinking about it. Midoriya, he'd stopped the boy before training the next day, earning a curious look in response. Can you tell me about the Mudman incident again? Midoriya hadn't really seemed to understand, but Toshinori goaded him into it. Then Toshinori stopped him mid-story to make sure. Wait, how did you dodge him? Midoriya blinked a few times. My song changed and then I heard his song coming from the tunnel behind me. You said you knew it was behind you because you could hear it, right? Midoriya nodded. So, you can hear the songs of everyone around you? Even if you don't know they're there? Well, yeah, Midoriya frowned. People's songs are always there. I hear them like footsteps. As if that said it all. In a way it did. Midoriya, you can hear my injury from my wound, yes? Midoriya nodded. Toshinori stared at him for a few moments before he coughed and waved the boy down to the beach. Number 3, Midoriya's quirk gave him a lead on anyone trying to sneak up on him. After 3 months, Toshinori was confused. He'd taken to writing the list of things he learned in his phone, and he grew more worried about it with each passing day. Midoriya. 1. Has the soul of a hero. 2. Seems to think his quirk is ill-suited for heroics. Midoriya's quirk. 1. Can gauge a person's well-being, emotionally and physically, after a few minutes of listening. 2. Allows him to hear people coming similar to any physical noise. 3. Warns him of anything important dangerous happening a few seconds beforehand. 4. Capable of projection, in small doses and quiet volumes. 5. Sarcastic. 6. Objects have songs too, sometimes. 7. Music can be influenced, and so influences the person to whom it belongs. Toshinori was impressed by what he'd learned. More often than not, though, he found himself wondering more about what Midoriya left out. For being a fanboy and obsessing over other people's quirks, the boy had all but written off his own. Just thinking back on their conversation about the Mudman made Toshinori wonder just how much the boy actually relied on his quirk in general. When the boy collapsed, Toshinori wanted to be upset. Instead, before he could finish his lecture, he heard the music again. Instead of the optimistic, steady beat he'd heard back in the alley, Midoriya's quirk played something insistent. It halted Toshinori, and when Midoriya looked up and exclaimed that he had to work harder than anyone else, Toshinori felt the music shake him down to his bones. He's looking that far to the future? When he revised the plan, Toshinori thought back to the slime villain incident. He thought of the songs he'd heard, and how it had affected him. Midoriya, would you show me the song that plays when I'm in my hero form? Midoriya had looked surprised, but excited as he accepted. Toshinori's smile hurt when he heard the music playing. It was the same music that had driven him to save Midoriya in the alley, just after Midoriya had given his conviction in words. Toshinori blinked and looked down at Midoriya in shock. Is Quirk played my own song for me? With that much effect? Midoriya smiled and went back to hauling the junk gladly. He doesn't inspire people because of who he is. He inspires them in spite of it. But that's not quite right either. Toshinori saw a few things that worried him too. Midoriya didn't talk about having friends. He never spent any time outside of school with other kids his age or talk about anyone but his mother. Sometimes, if Toshinori guided him along, Midoriya would talk about times he went out to learn about his quirk. He enjoyed talking about those little adventures most of the time, because they led to him muttering about heroes and quirks and their songs. But they were short and littered with trouble. For the life of him, Toshinori wondered how someone like Midoriya managed to find so much trouble in the first place. 8. Gives subtle information about quirks and intentions. Around month 7, he noticed the music more often. He was surprised by the music and the boy both. Several times he caught the sound just before Midoriya lifted something that seemed a bit too heavy, or when he pushed past what should have been his limit. Occasionally, when Midoriya looked out over the ocean, Toshinori felt the music whispering quietly between them. Even if he couldn't understand or put the sounds to words, he found himself looking forward to hearing that music. It happened more when he spoke up and encouraged Midoriya, so he began offering more inspiration. He learned when to offer it and how. He realized, a bit too late, that when Midoriya wasn't letting the music play, he was worried. In the 9th month, the music tended to sputter and die just after he'd accomplished something. Midoriya was guarded and quiet. For some reason, he was more apologetic than before as well. Toshinori could feel the boy's gaze on his back often, and when he turned to look, Midoriya pushed himself even harder. Whatever was bothering him was pushing him even harder than before. Considering his self-destructive nature, that wasn't a good thing. On the morning of the exam, he arrived at 6 to find Midoriya already finished. More than finished. Suddenly the sun broke over the horizon and Toshinori heard something ring out across the shore. A battle cry reverberated from Midoriya's chest, but more than that, his song began screaming defiance alongside him with more body than Midoriya could ever manage himself. It blew like a fierce gale at Toshinori's back, urging him forward. Coals inside of him suddenly blazed to life, drawing one for all out before Toshinori could do so himself. When he caught the boy and looked him over, Toshinori finally realized what he'd been trying to put his finger on for 10 months. 9. He inspires people by being who he is, because who he is brings out the best in everyone. Izuku stared up at the gates of Yui, shaking like a leaf. I'm really here. Songs passed by him constantly, all echoing with a sense of awe and determination. A few were laced with worry and doubt. One was definitely sick, that one over there. Move, Deku, or I'll kill you. Izuku bounced out of the way as the storm rolled past him. Bakugo's music had grown even more wild than it had a year ago, if that was possible, but he had avoided picking on Izuku ever since the incident. Maybe they weren't friends, but it was a start. Izuku had always loved listening to Bakugo's song. Despite everything, it was one of his favorites. I need to do my best too. Izuku swallowed and forced himself to smile. This is it, my first step. Before he could step forward, he paused. Somewhere, just over his shoulder, judging from the sound, was a song. Normally he would have taken it in and kept moving, but this? He'd never heard anything like it. Izuku spun around, catching the attention of a brown-haired girl with pink cheeks and a scarf. Before he could remind himself that he was staring, and obviously making the girl uncomfortable, the song washed over him. Her song was bubbles floating in a chilly spring morning. Bubbles that popped with a flash and a giggle, like children running barefoot through the snow. Chimes reminiscent of his mother's song broke through, only to be muted when she frowned at the strange boy who was staring at her. Wait. So sorry. Izuku bowed frantically, turning his eyes to the sidewalk. The song was quieter now, and the bubbles were full of smoke instead of light. A deep bass note thrummed beneath her tune that reminded him of Bakugo's thunder, but instead of breaking through the sky, hers clung and drifted like a thick, creeping fog of starlight. After a moment, she laughed, mixing the smoking bubbles with the shining ones. It's fine. Please stand up. People are looking. Izuku blushed and kept his eyes firmly on the ground. Good luck, Izuku said as he turned and walked away, suddenly filled with the urge to suppress his quirk until he was through with the exam. He had one for all, anyways. Chako watched as the weird boy left. He'd looked really embarrassed, but the way he was staring had been weird. Like he was looking through her, or barely looking at her at all. She shivered, feeling a bit violated and a bit flattered? No, she decided. Not flattered. Just weird. Katsuki was quiet throughout the lecture. With Deku sitting beside him, It was almost impossible to listen to present Mick's explanation of the practical. As soon as the hero walked on stage, Izuku had started giving off a faint music that sounded like a puppy staring up at a person. "She doesn't even make sense." Katsuki growled. "Deku never made any sense." Not since Katsuki had beat him up and sent the boy home with the biggest smile anyone had ever seen. People around them didn't notice the music, of course. Until they did. Then they hated Deku, same as Katsuki. "Whoever is giving off that awesome vibe, please turn off all your music for the presentation." Present Mike shouted. Katsuki blinked. Suddenly Deku was blushing and ducking in his seat. The revelation that the nerd was projecting without thinking about it was new. Deku's music quirk was useless, sure, but why was it changing? Why could other people hear it? Halfway through the lecture, someone stood up and yelled at Deku for being rude to the other examinees, even though the idiot had already turned his quirk off. That was pretty funny, but it wasn't enough to soothe the rage that was starting to build in Katsuki's gut. Deku glanced over at him a few times, worried, and for good goddamn reason, before he scuttled out of the theater in fright. Watching the little nerd flee was about as satisfied as Katsuki would get, till he got to actually kill things, he decided. Toshinori stared at the screen, watching as the students took off through the streets of the facilities. Every time Midoriya, or the blonde boy with the explosions, appeared on screen, Toshinori followed them closely. Bakugo, Toshinori had to think about that one, was a star from the beginning. Any robots who got too close were decimated with accuracy and ferocity that was more like an animal than a teenager. Midoriya was flunking. If he was honest, Toshinori hadn't expected the practical to go well, but he'd expected a little bit more. Midoriya was running around frantically, not doing anything productive at all. When he heard the music start up from nowhere, Toshinori finally realized what Midoriya meant all those months ago, talking about his quirk. A few moments after the music started up, someone pressed the button and released the 0 pointers. Toshinori focused on ground beta, watching carefully. Quietly the music began to ramp up, changing from something desperate. Is someone playing music? What's going on? Toshinori blinked in surprise as the teachers began searching themselves. They can hear it? Something resonated in Toshinori, before he could ask, and he spun to face the screen. Apparently, several of his fellow teachers had the same idea, because they all turned to look. Toshinori grinned. Midoriya's song had grown throughout their training. Optimism and determination had been given some spine and pushed to the limit. A frantic, rushing beat forced the teachers up onto their feet in shock as the quiet green-haired boy raced toward the robot. What's he thinking? Ochako stared as the creepy green-haired boy began running towards her. She'd only paused for a second, wondering where the ominous music was coming from, when the rubble had trapped her ankle. Now she had to be saved by. Her eyes widened as he ran past her and crouched. The frenzied beat gave way to a long, bright chorus. Some of the frenzy was still there, but the only thing Ochako could hear was, "Smayawayawash." Between the boy's leap and his fist striking the face of the robot, Ochako's breath caught. The music was definitely coming from above, from that boy, and quietly, she heard something come from the rocks beside her. A quiet tune full of awe, and why not? Above her, the boy was ringed in a halo of sunbeams, facing down a massive robot and glowing, glowing? When he struck, Ochako squeaked. The impact, even on the ground, 10 stories beneath him, his attack created a gale that cleared the rubble from her ankle, caved in the face of the robot with enough force to crack the pavement beneath her feet. A long moment passed, leaving him suspended there in the sky. Ochako hoped that she wasn't the only one who'd seen. Before she could be truly grateful, the boy began to fall. The music was back, but instead of frantic, it was insistent and afraid. Ochako bit her cheek and slapped the first spare part she could find, pushing it up into the air and leaping on as it rose. For a week after the exam, Inko wasn't entirely sure what to do. She caught him smiling at the fish they were having for dinner and, well, she'd been a bit frantic over the whole thing. He wasn't talking to her yet, but she'd started hearing Izuku's music playing throughout the house at odd times. The sound worried her. He sounded empty. When he gave him the letter and he disappeared into his room, she worried just outside the door. She heard some scuffling, a frantic shout. No, couldn't be All Might. Couldn't be. She didn't stop worrying until she heard the sound of trumpets and pure, unbridled joy coming through the door. Quietly, she slipped out and went to buy a little celebration dessert. Alternate chapter title: No one is really sure what to do with a green-haired boombox. Patient. Midoriya Izuku. Given quirk. One for all. Inherits the power stockpiled by all previous wielders of the quirk. Can be passed on through force of will. Includes 8 lifetimes of tragic memories and an arch-nemesis. Quirk. Soul Song. Can hear the manifestation of a person's health and experiences in musical form. The door was too big. Izuku hesitated just outside the door, staring up at where it met the ceiling. After a moment, he took a breath and shut his eyes and began listening carefully to the sound coming from inside the room. Bakugo's storm boiled, cracking and roaring and boiling upward faster than Izuku had ever heard it. Forget frantic, the song sounded more like a charging army than a drumbeat. If Izuku was right, he was arguing with someone. Beneath Bakugo's song was another, more even melody. Izuku could barely even call it a melody, really. Very few sounds made up the majority of the song. What he heard was light-hearted, calm and steady. Every few moments, a deep note of disappointment broke the rhythm, only to disappear. Shortly afterward, a few high-pitched notes rang out as the person tried again. He guessed it was someone single-minded, probably dealing with Bakugo. There were a few other songs coming from the classroom. A song made entirely of lightning, firing off so that each arc was a note and long steady strings of bass notes that Izuku could only compare to cables conducting and playing off every shot. A song that seemed entirely too ordinary until he listened closely and heard something like the steady pounding of feet while men stared at a bonfire. An opera? Yes, that was definitely an opera coming from the back of the room, quiet and high-class but full of cracks. Not breaks in the music, but hesitant moments throwing the entire song off key. Closer to the door was a cluster of students. Shouts and fistfights and rowing beneath a storm in the sunshine overwhelmed some of the others, forcing Izuku to push through that. He paused, watching some of the beats in that loud song skip before he finally pushed through. A song made of bubblegum and electricity, not lightning, but humming, live wire kinds of electricity, raced and beat in a steady, constantly changing rhythm. Someone was singing quietly in the background of the others, swaying along to a slow jazz tune checked by what sounded suspiciously like a heartbeat. He listened to that for a moment, reveling in the simplicity and the depth of that song. Near the back were a pair of odd songs. Both were nearly entirely muted. One was a simple set of beats that kept dissolving into its parts, creating little songs within the song for a few moments before they joined the main tune. Izuku took one look at the other song and backed slowly away from the door. "Oh, it's you." Izuku blinked as the bubbles began popping from right beside him. He blushed, half leaping into the air as the cute girl with the strange song appeared in the hallway. On instinct he turned his eyes to the floor and struggled to silence his quirk. Sorry I was in your way again, wasn't I?" No. I wanted to say thanks. For saving my life, I mean. I was worried you didn't get in because of that whole one-point thing, but you're here. Just like Present Mike said. But you had to speak up for me," Izuku stammered, blushing crimson as the girl rambled. She blinked at him with wide eyes. "How'd you?" The girl pet her head to one side. "Are you playing music?" Izuku froze and stared at her. You can hear that?" The girl stared at him. "So that is you? I remember something like this from the exam. Is your quirk music-based?" But Izuku stopped paying attention after the first few words. He leaned over, trying hard not to ignore the nice girl, but, "Is that a caterpillar?" Izuku felt his jaw drop a bit. Whatever the long yellow thing inching toward them was, the girl seemed to notice that he wasn't paying attention anymore and turned. You're late on the first day? That's irrational." Izuku squealed at the comment, when the caterpillar turned over to reveal a face. A face that subsequently drained a juice box with a ridiculously powerful pull. You're a teacher?" The caterpillar stood up and suddenly changed into a scruffy man dressed in a ridiculously long and thin scarf over black clothes climbing out of a sleeping bag. What kind of butterfly looks like that? Get in the classroom. You're still being irrational. Izuku followed him, staring at the man's back in confusion. For some reason, this man had no music. As if that weren't odd enough, he seemed to force the music around him into SBMson, muting everyone else's sound. Are you coming, Curly? The cute girl asked, eyes innocently wide. See Curly? Izuku mumbled, nodding and following her into the classroom. Kyoko was used to white noise and hearing things people didn't want her to hear. People were always surprised by how strong her hearing actually was. It bothered her just as much as it did other people, though no one really believed that. What Kyoko wasn't used to was suddenly hearing a bunch of strange noise coming from FANG everywhere. Someone had either heard she was coming and rigged speakers on everyone, or the school was under attack. But that didn't make sense, because no one else seemed to pick up on it. The only things she knew were that the noises were easily the weirdest things she'd ever heard, save for the unmentionable things she'd discovered about her middle school teachers, and that one boy seemed to have an actual song coming from him, if you could call that weird shit a song. She discovered the second thing on accident, because he arrived late. Standing in the same crowd with him made her grind her teeth and distracted her enough that she didn't hear any of Aizawa's speech until blonde BSE screamed, "Die!" and let rip an explosion that would have made most bomber villains jealous. Glad he's on our side. Kyoko blinked as a few sarcastic notes washed over the field. Before she could question the noise, her classmates started getting hyped about the exam, and then the music grew ominous. She glanced over at the nervous, green-haired student who'd shown up late and scowled. He looked ready to have a panic attack. Sensei. Aizawa paused in the middle of saying something and glanced over at the problem student. Kyoko grinned at the obvious impatience in his face. What, Midoriya? I just wanted to ask, what if our Q-quirks aren't suited for this? Kyoko frowned at the question. Even Aizawa looked a bit surprised, though he didn't bother with empathy. This is a hero course, Midoriya. We won't coddle you. Figure it out. But... Shut the F up, Deku. Green flinched. Kyoko didn't blame him. Blondie seemed a bit. Hey, isn't that a bit rude? Someone muttered under their breath. Kyoko sighed. Don't encourage him, Blondie growled, shoulder-checking the green-haired boy on his way back into the crowd. Deku never knows when to shut up. Apparently, his quirk is the FING same. Green made a strangled noise and caved in on himself. Slowly, the music began to fade. So it is him. Who doesn't have a handle on their quirk at this point? Kyoko sighed and decided to just be thankful that the sounds were gone. Any more distractions and she'd have gone mad or tried to murder Deku. Keeping his quirk locked down was distracting. Walking around without the songs in the background was like stuffing his ears full of cotton. Distracting enough that he was slower than he should have been on the tests. Sure, he was above the physical average because of the training. That wasn't enough for All Might's successor. Aizawa was looking at him too. Not much, but carefully. Once, Izuku let up on his quirk enough that he could check, and found Aizawa's song to be one of those songs. He sighed in frustration and shut his quirk off, resolving to listen some more later. The girl with the purple hair was definitely annoyed with him. Bakugo was getting more and more wound up. That cute girl kept looking at him funny, and then, in the background of everything was a very angry humming sound that was giving him a very bad headache. Midoriya, a nudge on the shoulder checked him out of his mental rambling. Aizawa was glaring at him again. It's your turn for the long jump. His score was awful. Everything was awful. All Might was watching now, hiding because he was so goddamn adorable for being a FING giant, and Izuku wanted to scream. Watching the bubble girl get infinity on the ball through made him slap himself in the face, earning a few more odd looks. There was nothing he could do about the leak when he stepped into the circle. Nerves had him shaking. Controlling the quirk that people hadn't been able to hear until that day? Impossible. He rolled the ball through his hands, playing back the entire test in his mind. You haven't even tried that yet. Izuku frowned at himself, then looked back at the crowd. But if you do, they'll hear and they'll get mad. Aizawa-sensei already looks mad. If I make it worse, minute, I don't have time to think about this. A strangled cry escaped his throat and Izuku flung his arm back. His throat and eyes stung. He'd popped his shoulder with that sudden motion and drawing on one for all made his whole arm hum as if he'd just eaten a miniature star, but he pulled on all might's power. Halfway through his throw the world shook with a sound like the opening of some ferocious monster's maw, devouring every song nearby and dousing the world in dissonant silence. Slowly, he stood up and stared at the ball at his arm, then looked back towards the crowd. They all stared back, confused as to what he was doing, but he turned just in time to watch Aizawa reach for his scarf. The entrance exam was... The words came out before Izuku could bite them back. Eraserhead. Aizawa paused, and Izuku blushed fiercely, then shut his mouth as firmly as possible. You were going to break your limbs again, weren't you? Izuku frowned, then looked up at Eraserhead and flinched. If you're just going to break yourself saving one person before needing to be saved yourself, how will you be a hero, Midoriya? What kind of hero are you trying to become? Izuku shut his eyes tight. Even with his quirk gone, the voices in his head and the songs he'd heard over the years didn't disappear. The inside of his mind felt like a raw, gaping wound. His heart thundered in his eyes and his eyes burned. Without a quirk, without All Might's quirk, Aizawa blinked. Izuku collapsed as the music returned to the world. All the music, all at once, without warning. Eraserhead's quirk had unlocked the floodgates that Izuku had carefully controlled. Without the balance, the full force of Izuku's song tore from his chest as a hurricane of noise and emotion. The sheer force of the quirk moved Aizawa back a few steps, clutching his ears. Behind him, Izuku's classmates screamed and fell backward. A splitting pain tore through Izuku's head. The world swayed and blurred, but it didn't stop the full force of everyone's songs echoing across the practice field, converging on him as a result of his quirk. When it became too much and his vision started to blur dangerously, Izuku stopped trying to force anything into SBMSN. Instead he forced himself to stay awake, drifting in and out of consciousness as he sifted through the songs and found his own. He'd never heard it so loud or so angry. Hidden deep in his song was the sound of One for All. He'd only had One for All for a month, and he'd grown used to hearing it play within his own unique song. Taking a different quirk into his own wasn't as cut and dry as they'd imagined. He knew that. During that time, he'd guessed a few things, both about himself and about All Might. Now he was sure. One for All wasn't just a quirk. They're all trapped. Izuku dug his nails into his scalp, watching as his classmates cried out. I'm hurting them. With the last of his strength, he took hold of his song and matched One for All peak for peak. For one terrifying moment he held his breath and drew the vice tight around his heart. Izuku's song paused for a second. 2 seconds. When he gasped for breath. Again the sound was gone. One for All quieted, even though it hummed angrily beneath Izuku's quirk. He spared a single glance toward the class. Eraserhead stood between Izuku and the class, staring at Izuku with the eyes of a cornered animal and his capture weapon ready. Izuku tried to stand, to go and ask if they were all right. The world went black before his first step hit the ground. Let me get this straight. After you cancelled Midoriya's quirk, in interest of his safety and for no other reason at all, you say, his quirk exploded. In the aftermath, every single student in our school felt the blow, and each individual was exposed to the power of a quirk that we don't yet fully understand. 2 of your students were knocked unconscious by the noise. Toshinori squirmed in his seat. Aizawa looked about as cowed as Toshinori had ever seen him. That's what happened. Aizawa muttered. What did you say to the boy, Aizawa? Before the incident. I warned him that he couldn't be a hero if he couldn't contain his power, Aizawa said. Toshinori, for the life of him, couldn't suppress his coughing fit. Niza picked up on it like a hunting animal. Something the matter, Yagi-san? I have some history with the boy. He's got a complex. We met a long time ago, when I resolved an incident in town. Toshinori gave a quick glance towards Aizawa and a nearly unnoticeable nod from Nizu confirmed that the principal understood his misdirection. But from what I understand, Midoriya has spent several years thinking his quirk was next to useless. Midoriya's quirk, Nizu tapped the file on his desk. This explanation is remarkably short. For something as strong as we've seen this afternoon, it should be much more extensive. If I were to guess, from what you both have told me, Midoriya was doing poorly. Between the threats from the other students and his poor performance in the tests, he was on edge. When told he couldn't be a hero, he must have been dealing with a lot. I can imagine that having less than optimal control over his quirk and being in that spot could create a disturbance. But what we saw wasn't a disturbance. Midoriya is powerful. We must see to it that we guide him well, in order to maintain that power. Toshinori sighed. Nizu was right for the most part, but neither of them understood Midoriya. Something told him that getting to the root of the problem would be difficult at best. I would like to be there when he wakes up, with both of you. We need a better explanation of what happened, from the victim's point of view, Nizu said. Toshinori blinked. Something told him Nizu wasn't talking about Midoriya when he said, victim. Kyoka hissed as she sat up. Light slanted through the windows, setting the room on fire and causing her to flinch when she caught a little too much light in her eyes. Oh, you're awake. Good, recovery girl. Kyoka frowned and raised a hand to her ear. How long was I out? About 3 hours or so. Between your sensitive hearing and being so close to him, I'm not surprised. Even in here that sound was terribly loud. The way recovery girl said it made it almost sound like the most natural thing in the world. Kyoka's eyes widened. That kid, what happened to him? Recovery girl nodded to the other bed, and Kyoka turned. Green looked like absolute sheet. What happened? Kyoka hissed. Her ears were still ringing from the explosion. Recovery girl sighed. Quirk exhaustion as well as regular exhaustion and, surprisingly, malnourishment. That boy. Really, I should have expected as much. He's a troublemaker, just like that other bonehead. But I can't be mad either. Kyoka didn't ask any more. I was dissing him pretty hard out there. Carefully, just as her mother had taught her, she played back the incident. Bakugo's shoulder checking and language. Aizawa getting fed up. Kyoka getting fed up. Everyone looking at him when he muttered. His squeaking, his frantic jittering. Signs of things Kyoka didn't want to think about. Is he gonna be okay? Recovery girl chuckled. He'll be fine with some rest. I'm more worried about Aizawa than the boy. Now why would you say that? Kyoka jumped as a rodent appeared directly behind recovery girl, accompanied by a skeletal man in a suit and her homeroom teacher, who, to recovery girl's credit, looked near dead. Recovery girl sighed and tapped the rodent with her cane. I heard what happened from the students. He needs the rest, so let him sleep. As if on cue, the boy groaned and began waking up. If anyone looked surprised or pleased with themselves, Kyoka decided it wasn't worth it to get involved. The two men and the creature took positions by the bedside and watched as Green started coming to. Kyoka, for her part, laid back down and turned over onto her side. Something told her that she wasn't supposed to hear the next bit, not that she had a choice. Midoriya-kun? How are you feeling? Toshinori asked worriedly. But I'm in trouble, aren't I? Kyoka felt her heart freeze in her chest. No one had a chance to say anything before he laughed. The sound was about as broken as could be. I'm sorry if I hurt anyone. Really. I've never had a problem with that before, but it's been getting more powerful and things have been so busy with the entrance exam. I was scared, you know? I didn't think about how loud it had actually gotten, or that other people would hear it, I swear. Midoriya, breathe, Aizawa sighed. We only asked how you were feeling. I'm fine. A little tired. Recovery girl snorted, tired indeed. When was the last time you slept a wink? Midoriya didn't answer that. No one bothered asking a second time. Was everyone okay? Midoriya whispered. Jiru's hearing made her particularly weak against the outburst. She's been unconscious since the incident. Everyone else seems okay, though they were rattled. Oh. Kyoka blushed, wondering why they'd lied so quickly. What exactly happened, Midoriya? Asked Nizu. The bed squeaked a bit as he shifted around. Kyoka could imagine him squirming under the gaze of the teachers. I think my quirk has been getting stronger. And I've been worried about it. I was working on keeping it down, but Everyone was excited and worried, and keeping my quirk shut off entirely was harder than usual. The sheets ruffled, but nothing happened. For a moment, no one spoke. Midoriya seemed uncomfortable, if Kyoka had to guess. Then I erased your quirk, Aizawa muttered. My quirk is usually always on. Other people hear it when I'm around unless I, make everyone be quiet. So, when it came back, I lost control. And I hurt people. What do you mean by your quirk always being active, Midoriya-kun? Nizu asked. Midoriya flinched audibly. Oh. Well, people give off songs no matter what, even if I'm not around, but I'm the only one who can hear them. But sometimes people affected by my quirk can hear the songs too. Lately people can hear them just being close by. I've been trying to keep it locked down, but being here, I got a little nervous. Will something like this happen in the future? Aizawa asked. I'll get better, I promise. A soft chuckle came from the skeletal man in the corner. The rodent made a small appreciative noise. Then we'll announce that a student had a bit of trouble with their quirk and that we are working on a solution. In the meantime, Midoriya, please feel free to come to us if you'd like any help with your quirk beyond what the hero course offers. Nizu said. Yes sir. Very good. In that case, we'll let Recovery Girl check you out and we'll leave you to get home. I'm sure your mother is worried by now. Oh, it's past the end of the entrance ceremonies, isn't it? Quite a bit, young Midoriya. The mouse chuckled. Kyoka frowned. After a few more minutes, the teachers shuffled out. The skeleton stayed behind and asked how Midoriya was feeling, but Midoriya didn't want to talk. For a few minutes after the tall man left, the room was quiet. Recovery Girl was making little noises as she checked Midoriya over, but I'm sorry I hurt your ears, Jirsen. Midoriya said quietly. Kyoka's eyes shot open. Recovery Girl seemed to pause as well. How'd you know I was awake? Kyoka sat up and turned, looking at the other bed. Midoriya wasn't looking at her, or Recovery Girl. He stared straight at the bed. I could hear you listening. Midoriya muttered. Kyoka frowned. Recovery Girl went back to checking Midoriya over, and then placed some gummies in his hand and told him to get some rest. They watched him shuffle out, barely standing, and Recovery Girl groaned. Those boys will be the death of me. That one in particular. Kyoka looked back at the door, then reached for one of her jacks to twirl it between her fingers. She wasn't entirely sure what to make of it all. Izuku tried but didn't get much sleep the night after the ceremony. Instead, he worked over old notes and tried some meditation, but his song was too unruly to deal with. Even his usual exercises for calming down didn't even out the melody. Classes the next day were mundane. He'd kept his quirk locked down since arriving at the school, and writing notes wasn't terrible without the songs humming at him from the board and page. Pro heroes moved in and out of the room, each one giving him a different amount of consideration. It took all his willpower not to be sick when he realized what was going on. Present Mike had definitely hesitated when he looked towards Izuku's desk. When lunchtime came, he raced out of the room for the cafeteria. Lunchtime, over the years, had become one of Izuku's favorite times of the day. Most people didn't go out of their way to bother him while they ate lunch, and Izuku could listen to songs when he was finished without worrying about others. He did his best to hit the line early, get through and find a spot in the corner. When he was nearly through his meal, he felt the hum of someone approaching. You're Midoriya, right? Izuku blinked a few times before swallowing the rice in his mouth and brushing his mouth clean. When he offered a shaky nod, the cute girl with the bubble music offered him a weak smile. Could I sit with you if you don't mind? Oh, sure. Izuku nodded again. The girl sat down, looking nervous. With her sitting so close, Izuku didn't dare let up on his quirk. She hummed quietly across the table, completely oblivious to the sound. Are you all right? After yesterday, I mean. She took a few bites of the meal, eyes widening in glee as she tucked in earnest. Izuku rolled her question around in his head for a moment before he smiled. Why, I just lost control for a bit. My quirk is kind of hard to handle these days. I was hoping to ask about that. What exactly is your quirk? Izuku turned his eyes to his table, then offered the simple explanation that he always gave. It's called Soul Song. I can hear the manifestation of a person's health and experiences in musical form. The girl stopped chewing for a moment, then swallowed. That sounds complicated. So that music that everyone heard, those were your emotions. Izuku frowned. But I don't remember much. When I lost control, I think that everyone's music all came out at once. Everyone's music? She pet her head to the side again. Izuku sighed and dug a hand through his hair. Well, yeah, everyone has a song. My quirk just lets me hear it and play with the volume a bit. So you stopped controlling the volume and it all came out at once? That's crazy. The girl nodded. This rice is really good. Izuku blinked. Yes. So, are you using it right now or what? Huh. The girl took another bite of her meal. Are you using your quirk? I would have thought the cafeteria was a hard place to be for someone with a quirk like that. Oh, I turned it off. She nodded and suddenly veered off topic, asking what he'd thought about the pro heroes being teachers. Yui's afternoon program was Hero Studies. Izuku had stared at the schedule for a while, wondering what it could entail, before he gave up. In the last few minutes before class started, he shut his eyes and focused. Deep in his chest, his song plodded along without a care. Even with his quirk on lockdown, there was no way to fully shut off his song. What he focused on was deeper than that. Buried within his own song was a bit of discord. One for all. Izuku frowned as he listened. One for all Might's quirk, was impossible to understand. Most songs had their own rhythms, at most 1 or 2, like that octopus guy, or at most 3. Izuku shuddered when he thought of that student. Songs were raw and confusing, but listening to them for a while always gave him some sort of common ground. All Might's quirk felt more like crazy radio static buzzing in the background of his own quirk, adding crazy spikes of power whenever it synchronized with his body. And this was what it felt like when he kept it turned off. He could remember the few times he'd used it. One for all was like injecting liquid sunlight into his veins and riding a tsunami over Tokyo. All Might's song had a lot of natural sounds, like sunlight and the wind in his face. Izuku wondered if that same torrent of power was there, or if it worked differently for him. I am coming through the door like a normal person. Izuku glanced up and smiled as All Might strode into the classroom. His classmates were going wild over the costume, the smile, anything about having All Might as a teacher in general. Despite keeping a strict lock on his quirk, Izuku could feel them humming with excitement. Battle training. Izuku felt himself moving through a haze. He changed into his costume slowly, barely even jogging as he headed through the tunnel. Battle training. Why did it have to be? The light blinded him as he ran out of the tunnel, and for a moment he lost himself in seeing everyone's costumes. Uraraka, he'd finally gotten her name, looked, well, she was cute. He didn't bother going any further for risk of completely losing his mind and thoughts. Most of the class looked uncomfortable with him but didn't bother saying anything. Even without listening to them, he could feel his own song become quiet in response. All Might was making a speech, something about the exercise, and Izuku was half listening. Once you better temper your vessel, you'll be able to use that power freely. Izuku pinched his lip, tuning into One for All's crazed hum. Uraraka nudged him when it was his turn to pick from the ball, which he was grateful for. All Might's eyes gleamed as he reached into the bucket, and Izuku decided to risk loosening control for just a moment. All Might's song was the same as always, down to that painful groan that came from his side and the strain on his song. Izuku knew he was getting weaker with time. The ball came up in his hand, and Izuku shut his eyes to focus. Deep within All Might's song, Izuku found what he was looking for. He stepped away, holding back tears as Uraraka bounced and congratulated him on being paired with her. All Might only has traces of it left. Like embers. Izuku stared at the pavement, too aware of the worried hum coming from Uraraka. He thought back to his first meeting with All Might. Passed on to me like an Olympic torch. Izuku's eyes widened. All Might thought of One for All as fire. As a torch, a duty, a flame that grew with each person carrying it. Izuku tuned All Might's speech out. His mind slowly grabbed the pieces he'd been looking for and put them together. All Might had One for All, but One for All was a part of his song. The two blended almost seamlessly. Izuku had only been able to find it because of the missing parts, the song humming in his chest, and a lot of stubbornness on his part. Izuku's One for All was chaotic. It was something beyond Soul Song, beyond Izuku. All Might's quirk was like a great, sputtering fire in a midnight blizzard. One for All hummed through Izuku like the force of a natural disaster, spinning together 8 different songs with so much static that Izuku could barely make any sense of it at all. Looking around, Izuku took a breath and loosened his death grip on his classmates' songs. I know I heard one that sounded like... He found it. A blonde boy with a song of cables filled with lightning was standing in the crowd, talking animatedly. Izuku listened to it for a moment before he pressed it down. Bakugo was staring at him again. Izuku met his eye and pulled on Bakugo's storm, causing the blonde's face to twist into a sneer. When his palms popped with firecrackers, Izuku heard Bakugo's storm rumbled with thunder. For a brief moment, lightning ripped through the clouds in a controlled, white-hot burst of fury. Lightning suited Bakugo. His explosions burned, but they were always carefully controlled. Izuku had never taken the time to look at the lightning before. The thunder usually sent him running for the doors. All Might thinks of One for All as a fire, a torch, something he passed on, but it sounds more like lightning. One for All hummed through him like Kaminari's song hummed, with all the contained power of Bakugo's lightning 8 times over. Calling it a natural disaster wasn't far off, considering what the users were capable of. Before he had a chance to think about the quirk more, All Might called his team. Izuku met Bakugo's eyes. It took all his concentration not to flinch before Bakugo's hate. Midoriya, are you okay? Izuku glanced over at Uraraka, then back down to his hands. He'd been wringing them enough that his arms hurt. I'll be fine. You and that Bakugo, you know one another, right? Izuku chewed his lip. Wait, we've known each other since we were kids. He'll know about my quirk. Is he the reason you're scared? Izuku wasn't sure why he was talking. Something about her eyes, he guessed. Uraraka looked so innocent and curious. Bakugo is amazing. He choked out. Quirk, strength, intelligence is a really tough opponent. Uraraka hummed. I guess with a quirk as powerful as yours, you'd be natural rivals, huh? Izuku froze. Huh. Uraraka blinked, staring as if the answer was obvious. Your quirk. It hit the entire school yesterday, and you said that was an accident, right? With a quirk like that, it's no surprise he thinks of you like a rival. Uraraka's eyes widened. A fated battle between men. Izuku didn't think he was supposed to hear that last part. I'm not. Bakugo and I aren't rivals. I can't even hold a candle to him. Izuku muttered. Uraraka frowned. Have you ever tried? Izuku stopped. Had tried. Back when he only had one quirk, he'd tried a lot. I mean, anyone who can beat down that zero-pointer is pretty strong, right? Uraraka elbowed him, smiling gently. Indoor anti-personnel battle training start. Izuku focused on breathing as they snuck in through the window. The entire place was corners, but it wasn't hard to navigate. It had only taken a few minutes to go over the layout. When they were inside, he dragged Ochako into a room and took a deep breath. Uraraka-san. Kaken is coming for me. He'll try to fight me. Uraraka blinked. Izuku kept talking. Ida is on the top floor in the middle. Probably he'll be ready for you. He's doing his best for this exercise, so be prepared. For now, you should follow a little bit behind me and wait till I lead Kaken away. For a moment, she looked like she wanted to fight him. Then she toughened up and nodded quietly. Izuku swallowed. With her faith in him, he would do everything in his power to win. There was no other choice. She followed quietly, trailing a full hall behind him and peeking around the corners. When he was a fair distance away, Izuku took another breath and let his quirk reach out to the music, instead of letting up on the volume. It took more effort than he would have liked, but the result was immediate. Each song hummed to life in the building, giving him an idea of where Bakugo and Ida were and making him all too aware of the gentle pop in Uraraka's song. He paused in the middle of the corridor as Bakugo approached the corner ahead of him. Part of him wanted to dash forward and try an ambush, but... Deku! Bakugo hissed. An explosion popped in his hand menacingly while the storm song began to churn with the force of a hurricane. When was the last time Bakugo had been this furious? Izuku couldn't remember. Why had he volunteered for this? A bubble popped by his ear, and Izuku ground his teeth. "Kakakin," he stammered. Bakugo sneered. "How'd you do it, huh? Training behind my back? Were you just pretending all along?" "Huh." Izuku took a step back as Bakugo advanced. "Your quirk is supposed to be useless," he growled. Slowly the storm rose and began to scream. Izuku frowned and stopped backing away. Bakugo stopped advancing. The storm hadn't broken yet. "I was always trying to figure it out. I never gave up, Kakin," he managed. Behind him, Uraraka's song hummed with anger and reassurance. Izuku felt a few of the bubbles pop and release more bubbles, as if her emotions were boiling over. Determination held her frozen at the corner behind him. Not determination to save him, determination to win and to trust him. Izuku lowered his stance into something vaguely hero-like. If only he could stop shaking. "I'm not going to be afraid of you, Kakin. I'm going to be a hero." "You spout all that crap, even if you're shaking like a leaf, you nerd," Bakugo grinned ferally. "You piss me off." Izuku felt the storm break. Bakugo's rage poured through his song with all the force of a churning ocean, ready to beat anyone beneath him into SBMs. And Izuku saw the move coming from a mile away, grabbed Bakugo by the shoulder and flipped him. For a long moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Bakugo fought to stand, staring up at Izuku in disbelief, and Izuku stared back. "I'll kill you." Bakugo seethed. Izuku darted to the right, straight down the hallway. "Your turn, Uraraka-san. Please don't waste this chance." Izuku slid around the corner and booked it. Uraraka took her chance and ascended. He let go of her song and focused on Bakugo, who was screaming something. Really, explosion was a little too well-rounded. Watching Bakugo chase him by rocketing around on explosions was terrifying. Corners helped, but not nearly enough. Ducking beneath Bakugo as he rocketed around one corner earned him an enraged squawk, but Bakugo still caught up. A high note caught his ear, giving him just enough time to spin and catch the kick on his guard, then pull the capture tape around Bakugo's ankle. Bakugo twisted, forcing Izuku to retreat and destroying the tape in one fell swoop. "There's that one. But I almost had him. What the F? Was it fun, laughing at me this whole time, you little sheet?" Bakugo roared. A kick swept by Izuku's head, followed by a grab with Bakugo's left. Every time, Izuku managed to slip out with just enough to spare. Slowly, his song was matching the crazed beat that Bakugo was setting for their battle. The songs faded to the back of his mind, twisting into a duet of music that warred rather than harmonized. The storm howled and beat down relentlessly. A single figure stood beneath, facing the thunder and the wind. Slowly his feet sank into the earth, and it was all he could do to fight against the wrath of the storm. He could feel the will to fight wane with each gale and each inch of clothing left open to the stinging rain, and each time it seemed he would fail, a scene played out behind his eyes. A memory of snow, of children laughing as they played along the bank of the river and of the morning sunshine through the trees. The warmth of a scarf, a coat, and a hug. Sunlight in bubbles of laughter. When the boy beneath the storm retreated, albeit slowly, it hurt. When he thought of finally turning and running, that maybe he'd bought her enough time, a hand settled on his shoulder. No one else stood beneath the storm, but he felt it as he felt the sunshine on a bright spring day. The wind of the storm was hot and angry. For a moment, he felt the cool breeze against smiling cheeks, and he could see a clear sky stretching over his city. A laugh tore itself from his chest, despite the rage of the hurricane, and he was filled with sunshine, with candlelight on the beach and the joy of holding a child, with bubbles of spring sunshine and laughter. Each song came together at his back, holding him up against the force of the torrential downpour. He screamed defiance at the storm. For years, he'd watched silently as the storm marched onward, always confident that it could destroy him any time it wanted. Once, he'd thrown his life away to try and keep the storm alive. Izuku admired the storm. He knew every inch of the storm, All the times it was sad and the times it was confused, each time it grew in strength and each time it was under the weather. He'd run from the thunder, been burned by the lightning and soaked in the rage and confusion. Every single day, Izuku faced the storm, whether he wanted to or not. Overhead, the storm howled defiance. Behind him, a chorus of voices rose and encouraged him. Beneath the storm, Izuku stood and screamed. He ducked beneath the right hook and swung for Kaken's face. Izuku's fist slammed into Katsuki's face like a bucket of ice water. For a moment, Izuku wasn't Deku. Deku ran away and cried and took his beatings like a good little extra. Katsuki had caught a few glimpses of this new person over the years, when Deku tried fighting back. Sometimes he'd dodge and swing wildly, but he'd gotten lucky too often. He dodged too well, swung at just the right times. Katsuki seethed when he thought about it. He didn't like not knowing. Deku was supposed to be worthless, but there was something beneath that. Something hiding behind that useless, quiet nerd persona that Deku gave off. No one else noticed how Deku watched people. They were blind to the things Deku wrote in those stupid notebooks. Everyone ignored the nerd and wrote him off, never quite noticing that something hiding deep in Deku's brain. But the thought of Deku landing a hit on him? A chime interrupted Katsuki's daily Deku drubbing. He couldn't stop himself from grinning like a maniac. Bakugo began to grin, raising the gauntlet that had chimed. Izuku could already guess what they did. Bakugo's expression confirmed the worst of his fears. He knew he should have been afraid, but instead he smiled. Echoes of All Might sang over his shoulder, and One for All hummed in his chest in anticipation. Izuku watched as Bakugo reached for the trigger and leapt to the side, all too aware of All Might's voice in his ear and Bakugo's response in the hallway before fire engulfed him. The blast roared off to his right and shredded his costume, leaving him maskless and missing a sleeve. Before the smoke cleared, he reached for his earpiece. Uraraka, what's the situation? Midoriya, what happened? He found me, I'm sorry. But I can't get to him. Where are you? The top floor, near the pillars by the window. The calm went dead as Ida began speaking again. Izuku blinked the smoke from his eyes and coughed. Bakugo came stalking through the aftermath of his attack, still grinning. If he wasn't tuned to Bakugo's song, he'd have been convinced that the other boy had snapped. Still ignoring me, eh? What, am I not good enough to fight you, Deku? Bakugo frowned and spat at his earpiece. Several notes of displeasure ran through his song before he rocketed towards Izuku in a massive leap. Izuku took a step and threw himself through Bakugo's smokescreen, narrowly avoiding the attack from behind. Bakugo barked in surprise and darted forward. When his left swung, Izuku flipped over his back and grabbed Bakugo by the shirt, hauling him forward and throwing him bodily across the room. Bakugo was shaking with rage as he stood up. Izuku stared him down, waiting. What the F? You're nothing. Bakugo roared. You've been holding back for so long, looking down on me. I can't stand you and your bullshit. I was never holding back, Izuku said quietly. Bakugo trembled, slowly adjusting his weight for his attack. Their song was as quiet as the eye of a storm for a moment. But I never stopped dreaming of the day when I finally beat you, other. Bakugo yelled and closed in with an explosion. The storm closed in like a wild beast, intent to make up the moment of silence by condensing into a single, massive surge of wind, rain, and thunder. Still, that roar was nothing compared to what it was truly capable of, and Izuku felt the chains digging into the song as if he'd ever been in any danger in the first place. No one else could know that Above the Storm was an aria unlike anything they'd ever heard before, so powerful and resolute that no song could hope to match it. Izuku watched in slow motion as Bakugo leapt forward, all too aware of what was coming. He ground his teeth and moved to meet the attack. Songs filled him, and even the storm fell away. Bakugo's fury and despair drummed onward, desperate for the victory he'd imagined. Uraraka's song scratched with each defeat she suffered, and Ida's song had twisted into a farce of a villain song. Izuku wanted to laugh and show them what he'd heard. None of them, not even All Might, knew the song of a real villain. As if in response, Ida and Uraraka's songs held their breath. For a moment, Deku and Kaken sang alone. One for all howled, and for a moment the world went white. A cough scraped the inside of his throat, racking his body with pain. His arm was numb for the moment, but it was all he could do to stay standing. Bakugo stared at him with wide eyes. For the first time in years, Izuku heard Bakugo's storm fail and dissipate, replaced by long, somber notes of despair. Couldn't use it like this? Izuku choked out. Bakugo flinched. But if it's you, then I can't afford, keep losing. All Might called the match and the world went black. After getting chewed out by Recovery Girl, seriously, why were old ladies so scary? Izuku stumbled back to class. He opened the door and shuffled towards his desk, pausing when the red-headed boy, whose song sounded something like a team of oarsmen, strode over and caught him. Hey Midoriya. That was a hell of a fight you guys had. I couldn't hear what you were saying, but you were really going at it. Izuku forced a smile and held up his good hand. What is going on? Thanks. Midoriya, your arm. He glanced over at Uraraka and saw real concern on her face. Oh, apparently I'm low on stamina and she couldn't heal it entirely. She nodded, not looking entirely convinced he was okay. Suddenly there was another one, a pretty girl with pink and horns and a song that hummed dangerously like an insect's wings. Midoriya. Nice dodging during the fight. Izuku backed up a touch in the face of her grin and the way she was bouncing. Slowly each of them called out a compliment on his fight, or at least a wish that he get well. For a moment he was dumbstruck. Then he noticed what was missing from the room. Where did? Uraraka noticed him looking and answered. Izuku nodded and darted towards the door. Kaken. Bakugo froze and turned to face him, face neutral. Izuku could hear the storm brewing again, but there was no rage. Dry winds blew, rasping over the strings. Izuku opened his mouth, and suddenly he had nothing to say. His mouth opened and closed for a moment, but he couldn't find the words. The songs were like that. Say whatever you came down here to say, Deku. I can't. Izuku frowned. I can't explain it. Not like that. For all that time you spend writing in those shitty notebooks, you're awful with words. I can show you. Izuku's eyes widened at his own words. He hadn't really known what he was trying to do, tracking down Bakugo, but it wasn't. Bakugo scowled at him. You mean with your quirk? Izuku nodded. Bakugo's growl deepened, then turned into a hiss. What the F dash? What kind of weirdo uses his quirk to explain sheet, Deku? Izuku didn't bother answering. He reached out with his quirk instead, carefully pulling on Bakugo's song and projecting his own. When Bakugo stopped growling, Izuku shut his eyes and remembered the song from the fight. As the last notes of the song died, Bakugo turned to him and glared. What the hell is that supposed to explain, huh? What am I supposed to do with your stupid music? Izuku watched Bakugo quietly. What the hell am I supposed to do when I can't beat you? How about that ice kid, half and half? I'm supposed to be number one, but why are you always getting in my way? Why doesn't anyone else know? You look down on everyone too much, Kaken. Izuku sighed. I don't. Bakugo spat. Don't. I don't need you to tell me what I'm feeling. I don't need your help, Deku. I'll figure it out on my own, and I'll make sure you all know I'm the best. Don't dare think this is the end. Izuku smiled. Bakugo scowled, but he didn't storm off. He waved his hand as if swatting a fly, and he trudged towards the gate. All Might was just a few minutes too late. Izuku chuckled when the giant was shrugged off. This is only the beginning, isn't it? Ochako wasn't sure what to make of the green-haired boy. First he'd been creepy green-haired boy who stared at people for no reason and made strange noises. Then he'd come running in to save her, managing to break 3 of 4 limbs and caving in a 10-story tall robot with a single punch. He still made strange noises, which didn't really add up, without getting a single other point in the exam. After the exam, trying to offer up her points as some form of thanks, she'd gone home and thought about him. Maybe a little bit more than she liked to admit. Trying to thank him had been both being thankful and not wanting to be indebted to someone like him. on the off chance that he tried using that as an excuse and still ended up being weird, then she had a way out. And she'd done the right thing. She really hoped he wasn't that kind of person. When she saw him standing at the door of their classroom, eyes closed in concentration, she wondered if he was weird at all. Could he just be awkward? Nervous? Had she really written him off so quickly before? She'd barely said a word to him and found him blushing like crazy, staring at his feet the entire time, until they'd been interrupted by their homeroom teacher, who cosplayed a caterpillar? Really? Could she do that during winter? Thanks to him interrupting their teacher during the demonstration, she learned his name and watched Bakugo be a complete a-hole all in the same few minutes. Seriously, what was with that? Who gave someone such a nice nickname and told them to shut the F up in the same sentence? Quietly, she thought they were like the protagonists in an anime, or a protagonist and the rival. She didn't like that, though, because Bakugo would be a really horrible main character. All her previous ideas went out the window when Midoriya exploded. She'd learned a few things after that, while Aizawa abandoned them on the field and Midoriya was ferried to the nurse. 1. Bakugo knew something about it. Kirishima nearly got his hand blown off, so asking wasn't a good idea. 2. Everyone on campus had been affected by Midoriya's quirk. Everyone seemed to have a different idea about what happened, but they'd all heard some crazy noise and no one knew what it was. 3. Ida was strangely worried about Midoriya. She'd literally run into him on her way out the gates, and Ida seemed kind of funny. Was he? It was none of her business. Later that night, when she thought about it, Midoriya's quirk seemed special. She'd always heard something weird when he was around, and she could remember something weird when he'd smashed the zero-pointer. His quirk must be some sort of sound quirk, but why was he so skittish? Was he just walking around with that noise on all the time? Ochako couldn't imagine walking around with power like that running rampant. Midoriya in class was quiet. The entire class was quiet, actually. No one seemed sure of how to approach him. There was an aura of despair clinging to him like his own personal rain cloud, and anyone who got close to asking seemed warded off by it. She managed to approach him during lunch and ask about his quirk, but it seemed really strange. How could everyone have a song? What kind of song was it? Despite her curiosity, he seemed really nervous, so she stuck to regular topics. That seemed to keep him taking, at least, and he relaxed a little bit. Really, he didn't seem so bad. Just nervous and frightened. Ochako decided she would be his friend if it killed her, because he seemed lonely. Watching him before the trial was a bit unsettling. Midoriya seemed to drift from worried to focused to anxious to focused again and finally to pure panic when their pairing was announced. As he sat wringing his hands nervously, staring at the page but not seeming to really learn anything. Seriously, was he always shaking that badly? A thought struck her. Midoriya is really afraid, isn't he? She'd only meant to ask about Bakugo, because their whole dynamic didn't really make sense, but somehow they'd stumbled on down that road and ended up in the really depressing area Ochako hadn't wanted to end up at. Offering up support was what teammates did, right? Did Midoriya seem so lost? When they stepped inside, he was different. He'd spent the last minute of preparation time thinking quietly, without all the worry in his face. Suddenly he was ready, and he knew more than she'd expected. She followed him because she didn't have anything better, and because she was sure he needed a partner. Not someone trying to fight him. She watched from the corner as he baited Bakugo and flipped him. She watched Midoriya flip Bakugo over his shoulder, despite shaking like a leaf. Bakugo climbed to his feet, just as confused as she felt. Midoriya took off down a hallway and Uraraka felt something urge her forward. Finding the rocket was easy with the top floor so empty. When she peeked around the corner and saw Ida getting into character, though, she lost control. The fight wasn't easy on her stomach, but she held it together. Something was coming. What, she didn't know. But she could feel it in her bones. Midoriya would. Ochako and Ida both paused when they heard it. Unlike the day before, or the zero-pointer, the song came quietly. A few beats from beneath their feet, echoing quietly and gradually becoming louder. It sounded familiar, and at the same time like nothing she'd ever heard. Too many parts played out at once. Voices screamed and wept and sang. all while some inhuman sound accompanied them in a song made of pure emotion and old wounds. She collapsed on the floor, feeling as if the music had consumed her and drawn her towards whatever was happening below. For a brief, terrifying moment, she cowered behind Midoriya, caught in the throes of a hurricane. Her hands reached out and touched Midoriya's shoulders, holding him up as he sank back beneath the downpour. When he turned and looked over his shoulder, she caught a glimpse of his smile. The storm broke overhead, and sunlight wreathed Midoriya and everyone standing behind him. Ochako stood beside a smaller woman with green hair, both of them dwarfed by All Might. Bakugo appeared for a moment, standing beside Midoriya and staring up at the storm with a smile only to disappear a moment later. As he faded, Ochako looked up and saw him flying in the sky over the storm, looking down at them. The storm convulsed, converged and descended like the wrath of the gods, and Uraraka felt her grip on Midoriya's back loosen. All Might and the other woman disappeared, leaving her alone at Midoriya's back. She stared as he drew back an arm and laughed in the face of what had to be the end. Ochako was ripped away as the fake Midoriya began to glow. Now Uraraka. The music died, the world held its breath, and Ochako leapt up to grab the pillar at her side. When the floor exploded and flew towards the ceiling, Ochako grinned. Hero Team wins. Ochako and Ida watched Midoriya being taken away with a sense of ew. It was the only word that could describe the feeling, but it didn't quite describe how empty it felt. As if someone had left a cave in their chests, and they could only stare at the ceiling in awe of the size. Whatever they'd seen, it wasn't normal. She knew that. Midoriya's Quirk had created that. He'd spun them all together as if they weren't only school kids but characters in some epic tale. She glanced over at Ida before they left the building and followed his eyes to where Bakugo was being escorted by All Might. Bakugo was the storm. Right? Ida asked, his voice full of uncertainty. Ochako frowned. I'm not really sure what that was. She glanced over at Ida again. Where were you? I'm not sure. I was caught in the storm, but watching from the ground while Midoriya. Ida clenched his fist. I don't think. I was supposed to be where I was. I wanted to be with Midoriya. Ochako knew what he meant. How? Why did we see that? Ida's voice grew raspy. Ochako sighed and grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. Something about a fated battle between men, I think. Ochako was glad Ida got the title of VIP, even if they knew the truth. Bakugo looked wrecked, for lack of a better word. If her stomach hadn't been acting up, she'd have asked if the others had felt Midoriya's Quirk even here, in the control room. The three of them filled into the crowd as the next teams moved out, and the short girl with the earjacks nudged her arm. Hey, did you guys hear anything weird while you were out there? Ochako blinked. Yeah, but it was more than that. The girl's eyebrows rose. Ochako looked at the screens, watching as the new teams filed into a new building but remembering what it felt like to be beneath the storm. I don't really know how to describe it. Even though he was 2 floors beneath us, it felt like I was fighting right alongside Midoriya and Bakugo. At least for a second. Jairu stared at her for a moment before she nodded and turned back to the screens. Ochako watched the rest of the class chatting as they packed up their things. Part of her wanted to join them. The rest of her felt as if her energy had been totally drained from the trial. Ida seemed the same. He hadn't even yelled at Tokoyami for sitting on the desks, but she didn't want to talk to him much either. The door slid open quietly, and the class paused to watch as Midoriya slipped in. Before he could reach his desk, Kirishima caught him. Hey Midoriya. That was a hell of a fight you guys had. I couldn't hear what you were saying but you were really going at it. Midoriya smiled sheepishly and rubbed the back of his head with the hand not in a sling. Ochako blinked and confirmed that yes, his arm is in a sling and cast. Midoriya, your arm. Oh, apparently I'm low on stamina and she couldn't heal it entirely. Midoriya smiled, genuinely, this time. Ashido, the pink-skinned girl, closed in on him. Midoriya. Nice dodging during the fight. Midoriya's smile became a little more forced as, one by one, their classmates called out compliments. There was still some space. Only Kirishima had bothered to close the gap and talk to him face to face. Everyone seemed to be aware that there was something more to Midoriya than they could put their finger on. Where did? Midoriya looked towards Ochako, and somehow she guessed what he meant. Oh, Bakugo headed home a few minutes ago. He nodded, frowned and rushed towards the door. When it shut behind him, the classroom grew quiet again. So, which one do you think is stronger? Kaminari broke the silence, glancing towards the back of the room. Midoriya or Todoroki? Ochako headed towards the door as the debate sparked up and died, ignoring the answer entirely. She watched as Midoriya and Bakugo had a shouting match on the path, and she hugged her arms. After 2 days, she had no idea what to think about Midoriya. Why couldn't she stop thinking about him then? The past is a mirror and pictures cut deeper than they thought. Waves flowed up the shore, calmly echoing across the beach. A gentle wind blew, but there was nothing behind it. Heavy shadows blanketed the beach, leaving empty space between the songs. Echoes changed and drifted feebly in the emptiness until they finally died out. The song of the ocean was deeper than anyone could ever truly understand. Clouds drifted too far overhead for him to be sure, but the song of the sky was gentle as a whisper on clear mornings. The morning was calm and silent as nature ever could be. Izuku's eyes were closed and focused, directed inward, where he could feel the pulse of his song. His song was long and sleepy from being on the beach at 3 a.m. Peaks were no different from the tiny waves that gurgled up the shore and trickled out again between the swells. Between the ocean and the sky, Izuku's song was something like the sand. Even deeper than that was another song. Slowly, Izuku was learning how to pick apart the chaos of One for All. Trapped within Izuku's song, One for All had no choice but to relax in the early morning stillness. 8 different songs, all woven together at their peak, made up the quirk Izuku had received from All Might. He could see All Might's music pulsing within the concert, as sunshine stood out at midday in the summer. Just before All Might, a magenta song stood firm, despite the heavy burdens dragging the corners of her smile. Furious orange pulsed before that, and a light green trudged onward before that. Red, blue and white sang quietly at the forefront of the song. Across each song, Izuku could feel them weakening as he played them back. White played feebly, with traces of sickness and misery laced heavily through the song. Sickness, and some sort of static that Izuku couldn't identify. Almost as if, instead of being a part of the song, it was pressed onto it like a brand in the shape of someone's hand. But that was impossible, right? Izuku sighed, listening to the song's pulse inside him. He decided to ask All Might about the static. For some reason it was vaguely familiar. He reached out and took hold of the power, thinking of All Might's power. A grunt escaped him as One for All filled his veins and muscles. Slowly, as he'd learned to do after the entrance exam, he took One for All into his entire body and held on for dear life. Izuku's song changed. One for All filled his song with the strength and hope of all those who'd borne the quirk before him. More than that, deep in the song he could feel the strength of everyone who'd supported those people woven in, like a gigantic tapestry of heroes masquerading as a quirk. Just like yesterday, Izuku thought of his fight with Bakugo. Feeling All Might and his mother and Uraraka-san weaving their songs into his own and lending him their strength, if only in spirit. It wasn't only in spirit, was it? One for All takes the voices of those who need help and combines it with brave hearts, he said. Does it actually work like that? Filled as he was with the strength of One for All, Izuku felt as if he was about to break. It took all his strength not to move, to focus on the song. Carefully he opened his eyes. Maybe I can try some things with my quirk. Izuku watched the ocean roll in and out, keeping his breathing even, and took hold of the combined quirk. Slowly he eased up on the control he'd kept over his quirk. Just as slowly he heard the song of Izuku, All Might's successor, coming to life across the beach. When he loosened control entirely, he winced. One for All was a little too powerful for him to leave unchecked. The sound played across the entire beach easily, and since he was the source it rattled him down to his bones. As he turned the volume down, any idea struck him. Keeping control of his quirk held his song tight within his heart. If One for All was his quirk, then he could do the same. Unleashing the full power was beyond him, but that didn't mean he couldn't control it at all. He filled his lungs with cool ocean air and focused. One for All didn't like being taken and forced, so he tried finding Izuku's song within the song of All Might's successor. There was so much difference between the two that he was a bit surprised Recovery Girl could heal him at all. Power like that should have reduced him to dust, no matter how strong he was. Izuku grinned when he thought of himself as a conductor, stepping onto a podium and facing the orchestra. One for All watched him carefully, ready to protest the moment he tried to take control of it. His song, meanwhile, fell silent and waited. Between breaths on the beach, Izuku hesitated. Toshinori wasn't entirely sure why he ended up at the beach. Sleep wasn't easy with his scar, but he was tired from working so much. Worry made his dreams a mess, and old memories mingled with nightmares until he was miserable enough to climb out of bed and stumble out of his apartment. Over the months before the entrance exam, Midoriya had turned the beach into a paradise. People frequented the place now from what Toshinori had seen, and there was even a question of who'd done it among the local magazines. Not that no one at all had noticed, but it wasn't until afterward. For the time being, no one knew who the green-haired youth really was. He'd barely parked when he was forced to cover his ears in a desperate attempt to hide from the noise. Compared to what he'd heard from Midoriya in the past, this was more like an entire orchestra of voices and emotions singing at once, all in a rush. The music dimmed and Toshinori shuffled towards the guardrail, shocked yet again by the sort of things Midoriya's quirk made him capable of. Something told him that he'd just heard One for All in its entirety. Nothing else made sense. Maybe it was arrogance, but he wanted to believe that only his quirk, the legacy his master had passed on to him and he had passed to Midoriya, could be capable of such a terrifyingly awesome sound. Midoriya was there. Toshinori didn't bother wondering why. If he asked his protege, he'd have to ask himself. He didn't want to think about why he was there. At least, for the moment, he knew why Midoriya hadn't been sleeping much. What surprised Toshinori was that the boy was glowing. Lightning arced off of his skin in gold and orange and white and red and blue flashes. Slowly, though, the glow and the colors faded. Toshinori gaped as the minutes passed, and Midoriya was left sitting there, suffused in a faint shine and arcs of lightning similar to the color in his eyes. A grin split his face and he shook his head, but when he shut his eyes, Toshinori stood at the foot of a mountain. Littered across its slope were countless shadows, all flickering and staring towards the sky, same as Toshinori. Clouds hid the top of the mountain, but well above any of the other figures stood one that glowed with the fierceness of the sun itself. Bolts of real lightning struck the crag on which the figure had paused, looking down across the slope and flashing a wide smile in Toshinori's direction. All around him the shadows' forms solidified, and the clouds overhead shrank back before his light. Someone cheered, and the cheer took hold. Everyone on the mountain cheered him as he took another step up the mountain, and they followed him quickly as they could. Toshinori opened his eyes and leaned on the rail, content to watch as Midoriya's glow fluctuated. His smile was starting to hurt his cheeks. After a little while, he turned and headed back to the truck. He slept soundly for the rest of the night, and dreamed he was taking a nap in sunshine. Izuku yawned as he headed into the classroom. People noticed him and waved from their little groups, but none went to greet him. With the white-knuckle control he kept on the strength of their songs, he couldn't read into it too much, so he ignored the negatives his brain spouted as much as he could and took his seat. Midoriya-kun, did you get bothered by those people with the cameras? Izuku blinked as Uraraka slipped by. People with cameras? Oh, I saw a crowd so I found another way in. Uraraka gave him a look. A lot of people were confused by Izuku. He didn't talk much, and people in school tended to avoid him before, so he wasn't really sure exactly what it was that confused people. He took a wild guess. There's another gate on the north section of campus. Wait, Midoriya, didn't you just get here? Izuku glanced towards Kirishima and shrugged. I got here about an hour early. The path from the north section is pretty long. Now there were two of them. Izuku waited a few minutes, but when they showed no sign of stopping he couldn't help glancing between them. What? Nothing, Kirishima chuckled. Uraraka sighed and took her seat. Izuku ruffled his hair and reached for his bag, pulling out his English notes and scowling down at the page as it began humming faintly. School was weird. Aizawa lectured both Izuku and Bakugo, telling the former to stop ending up in the nurse's office and the latter to grow up. Bakugo just grunted in response. When he told them the class was picking a class representative, Izuku glanced around the room. He'd taken a bit of time before the Quirk test to look at their songs, but that was before he knew people could still hear him. Trying to pick a president out of the crowd would be hard if people were listening, but picking through them one by one would take a long time. Ida had just recommended democracy when Izuku decided that choosing a president wasn't important enough to go digging through people's songs. The voting was quiet. People chose quickly, though he assumed they were all voting for themselves. Any one of them would be fine, if they could step up to the job. After a moment or two, Izuku wrote down a name on his paper and gave it up, watching as everyone stared. Of course, his had been the last one. Midoriya Izukujiro Kyoka, 3. Yaoyorozu Momo, Ajuiti. Everyone else, 1. Izuku stared at the board blankly after they'd finalized the decisions. Uraraka called for him to head up to the front, and he did. Standing up in front of the class was nerve-wracking, but he managed not to shake too much. Yaoyorozu looked disappointed though, and Izuku would wager money that there were a few more slipped notes in her song. Classes blurred by as usual, and Izuku ended up getting a headache long before they were due in the cafeteria. To his surprise, Ida came to sit with them as well, looking. Actually, they both looked a little bit out of sorts. Izuku frowned and ate quietly, chiming into the forced conversation occasionally. Until he couldn't. Are you both? If you'd prefer to sit somewhere else, I won't be offended, Izuku said slowly, looking at them both. For a moment they stared back, then looked at one another. What are you talking about, Midoriya-kun? Ida's voice was carefully measured. Uraraka looked a bit embarrassed, as if she knew that things weren't normal but couldn't say why. You're both acting strange. Even if I didn't have my quirk I could tell. I'm glad you're here, honestly. I like both of you. But if you'd be more comfortable sitting elsewhere I won't blame you for that. Izuku set down his chopsticks and watched as Ida's expression gradually changed from careful to curious and cautious. Midoriya, may I ask what is your quirk, exactly? Ida asked quietly. After a moment Izuku frowned. It's called Soul Song. It plays people's emotions and history as a song. Ida blinked and waited. When Izuku didn't continue, Ida frowned. Excuse me if I'm being forward, but you destroyed the zero-pointer and the building from the battle test with a single punch, and then there was that explosion of noise on the practice fields. If I hadn't been in the battle trial yesterday, I wouldn't believe you at all. After what we experienced, though, I don't doubt you. Is that really all there is to your quirk? Ida managed. Izuku hummed. Oh. The explosion was just a bad day. Uraraka's eyes widened a bit, and Ida grunted in surprise. Izuku shrugged. I'd been having some trouble controlling my quirk since it was getting stronger, and Aizawa-sensei erased what little control I had. But I figured it out a little more, and I think it's okay now. As for the super strength, sometimes when my adrenaline gets pumping I get a power-up. I'm working on that. Just a power-up? Uraraka muttered quietly to herself. You destroyed a building. That's super strength. I guess. Izuku scratched his head. Lying about one for all didn't sit well with him. But he couldn't tell them he had two quirks either. Like I said, I'm still getting that under control. But, what did you mean after what happened? Did my quirk do something to you guys? They shared a glance. Uraraka pushed her tray away from her. Izuku's eyes widened. If Uraraka was pausing her meal, it was serious. Yesterday, when you fought Bakugo. Ida took a breath. We were fighting above you, but in the middle of it we heard a noise. I've heard your quirk before but not really clearly, and not that loud either. Uraraka stared up at him, eyes wide. Her eyes were too innocent, Izuku thought. Permanent puppy dog eyes. Eyes like that were too powerful. But yesterday it was really loud. Once we heard it we were confused and then, I'm not entirely sure how to describe what I saw. It was a hallucination. Like, we were still looking at the floor, but at the same time there was this big storm and you were there looking up at it. Wait, you saw that? Izuku paled. They nodded. I'm so sorry, both of you. I didn't think anyone else would get caught up in it. Bakugo didn't think it, that's not. Bakugo was there too. Uraraka said. Her voice sounded wistful, like she was remembering something she didn't want to forget. It was so real. But it didn't make any sense either. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, Izuku groaned. I'm still working on controlling the output, but yesterday I guess I lost control again. It's fine, Midoriya. The outcome would have been the same regardless, I'm sure. Ida said. But after experiencing a vision like that, and hearing sounds that I can't describe, I'm curious about your quirk. Izuku dug through his hair nervously. I guess what you heard were emotions. Emotions played out like musical notes. My quirk, it lets me hear everyone's song. Everyone has a song, and they don't make sense unless you use metaphors. What's my song like? Uraraka blinked innocently, and Izuku grew red in the face. I can show you, if you'd like. After a moment, she nodded. This may get a bit loud, Ida, if you're right next to her. If Uraraka doesn't mind, I'd like to try listening. Uraraka smiled and nudged him. Izuku smiled weakly. Whatever you hear, it may not make sense at first. So, Izuku trailed off, then took a breath and reached out. Keeping the locks on his quirk, Izuku chewed his lip and tentatively reached out to Uraraka with his quirk. She wanted her song, not their song. Izuku was sure mixing his song with a girl's would have set him on fire. Control was unsure at first. His song and Ida's both grew louder, and he had to force them down. Pulling only Uraraka's music made him sweat a bit from the exertion, but eventually he let it play softly across their table. One bubble popped, then another. Gradually the music played out, gentle as a spring morning with all the smoke and sunlight of a frozen stream bank. Her darkness was there, rumbling quietly beneath the rest of her music, but it was quiet in comparison to the airiness of the tune. A deep resonant string played harmony with pearly keystrokes and wind chimes. Izuku sighed as the music leveled out, just loud enough for the three of them to hear. Uraraka's eyes widened until she was staring at him, staring through him, and Ida was listening with an unreadable expression. After a few minutes, Izuku let the song fade, pressing the volume back down to a quiet hum. For several minutes afterward, Uraraka didn't say anything. Ida stared at Izuku as if he'd just shown Ida a mythical animal instead of a quirk. Izuku missed the rest of what Ida said when he noticed the tears falling over Uraraka's cheeks. Uraraka? I'm sorry I messed up, didn't I? Was it too loud or maybe too much? He offered her a handkerchief from his jacket, but she wiped her eyes and waved him off. I'm fine, Midoriya. A shudder racked her body as she steadied herself. Izuku wrung his hands until she looked up and flashed him one of the brightest smiles he'd ever seen. That was amazing, Midoriya-kun. Thank you so much. Izuku blushed bright red at that, then turned back to Ida. Ida-san, what? A sound screeched through the building suddenly, causing every student around the cafeteria to stand up and half panic. Immediately, Izuku felt what was coming. A stampede of buzzing songs erupted from the students in the cafeteria, and he winced as it continued to grow louder. One of the upperclassmen told them about the alarm, and soon the three of them were packed into the crowd being dragged through the halls. Being trapped in the confined space and losing hold of his classmates frayed Izuku's nerves, but he waited. Something was happening, that much he was aware of. The sensation of being trapped in the crowd was like being stuck inside a hornet's nest. Izuku cursed beneath his breath as he was shoved against the wall, watching as Ida and Uraraka were separated and Ida was forced face-first against the glass. Epiphany rang out over the crowd as Ida looked out the window, and Izuku took the chance. Ida's song was simple, which he was grateful for. Amplifying his song wasn't hard now that he knew what to look for, though everyone else was in a panic. Desperately, Izuku let his quirk spread out as much as he could and focused on the panic blanketing the crowd. For half a second, his entire body was racked with physical pain, as if he were trying to lift a plate of metal far beyond his strength from the very middle of it. He got the feeling he was standing on top of the plate as well, though it didn't make much sense. When he felt it budge, he pressed even harder. Slowly, people began to calm down. Alarm was still there and worry, but panic was dying out. Then Ida went flying over the crowd and Izuku groaned. Apparently he hadn't needed to do anything at all. Uraraka smiled in Izuku's direction, and he returned it gratefully. On the way back to the classroom, Izuku hummed and smiled a bit more. Ida was much more comfortable in a pinch, and Izuku wasn't quite ready for a spotlight. Turning over his spot as class rep was easier than he'd expected after all, though Yaoyorozu missed too many notes for his liking as he spoke to the class. He really needed to do something about that soon. Please partner up in order so we may enter the bus in pairs. Izuku ground his teeth against the incoming yawn and wondered if Ida was taking to his new role a little too well. Of course the bus wasn't the right kind, and Ida ended up scolding himself the moment they made it on board. Chatter filled the bus as they headed across Yui campus. He drifted into a light doze until the person next to him decided to take an interest in him. The sound of a song buzzing curiously in his direction woke him, and he turned to meet a pair of black eyes. Kero! Izuku glanced around, noticed a few people looking his way, now that he was awake. They all buzzed with the same curiosity, though not as fiercely as Azui. Midoriya. I always say what's on my mind. Izuku attempted a smile. Your quirk doesn't make sense. As if that was news, Izuku winced. He glanced over to Uraraka, who was laughing and chatting with some of the others. Ida was scolding people. So far only 6 people had explicitly heard his quirk. All Might was the only who knew everything about it. How was he supposed to explain it? The longer he waited though, the more she stared and croaked at him. No, you're right, it really doesn't make sense. Hey, if he's not comfortable talking about it, don't push him, Azui. Totally not cool. Kirishima piped up from across the bus. Izuku ducked his head in relief. Even if it doesn't make sense, it's super powerful, right? Better than something like this. Izuku frowned at the way Kirishima's song cracked with the strains of self-doubt. Hardening was simple, sure, but it was more powerful than Kirishima believed. Kirishima refocused on Izuku, who forced a smile. Being flashy isn't everything. Your quirk is really great, as long as you have the drive to back it up. The cracking in Kirishima's song faded. A somber note rang out from everyone on the bus. Somehow, Izuku had spoken just when everyone quieted down, and everyone had heard him. He blushed and ducked his head again. Powerful quirk and good personality, Kaminari whistled. Man, I think you just jumped ahead of Todoroki and Bakugo in terms of hero-ness. Izuku flushed a bit. Bakugo simmered and thundered in his seat near the back of these. Not all of us have a FING empathy quirk, DMN extras. He really does have a terrible personality. Tsuyu croaked. Bakugo erupted. Uraraka laughed and cheered. Yaoyorozu's song skipped a bit, and Izuku's eyes lingered on the vice rep for a moment. Just long enough for her to notice, and for him to sheepishly glance at the floor. With all the control he'd gained of his quirk, he was forgetting just how much he needed to control himself as well. As they got off the bus and peered up at USJ, a peal of fanfare interrupted the class. It caught Izuku by so much surprise that it projected and caused him to jump, making just about everyone stare at him in confusion as he turned bright red in embarrassment. No one seemed willing to let it go, though after a few minutes of pointedly staring at him they started heading towards the facility. When they stepped through the doors, a peal of awe rang out from his classmates. He felt the same. USJ had a simulated lake, what looked like a waterslide, a mountain, a forest, and a pair of domed buildings. One seemed to hold fire and one sang like a torrent of rain, branching off from a single central plaza. Izuku blinked in surprise as a new song came up the steps and approached the class. The new song sounded as if All Might's song was played in the void between a star and a black hole. The endlessly hungry maw of the unknown sapped at the edges, but starlight rang out ever alien with a trace of solar wind blowing through it like laughter. Space Hero 13 stepped up to exchange a few words with Aizawa in regards to All Might. Judging from the 3 fingers, All Might was out of time. Once the worry for his mentor passed, really, Izuku wasn't surprised that All Might used up all his hero time. He noticed the adoration pouring off of Uraraka and he couldn't help but join in. 13 rambled a bit, but their message was inspiring and unique. Carrying All Might's power made Izuku hyper-aware of the implications that a pro-hero faced. Villains were the ones who used their power carelessly. Pros were the ones who trained their control to an extreme and were rewarded for their effort. Izuku paled when the sound in the room died. 13 was still talking or finishing up. For a moment, Izuku thought Aizawa had turned on his quirk, but even the drone of Aizawa's erasure was absent. He ran to the head of the steps and stared down at the room, searching. He'd felt this same dread tune before. Slowly, a worn violin bow began sawing at his nerves, filling the entirety of USJ with its ominous tone. A single beat echoed throughout the room, beginning some of the most foreboding music Izuku had ever heard from his quirk. Midoriya, don't get excited, Izuku ignored Aizawa. His eyes widened painfully as songs began to project faintly from the center of the dome. We need to get out. The class panicked at Izuku's outburst. Bakugo at least seemed to pick up on his panic, but time had already run out. In the plaza, a dark purple hole opened in the air and swirled open, letting several people in simple, rugged quirk gear step through. Aizawa grabbed Izuku and shoved him backwards by his gym uniform. Stay together, Aizawa called out. Izuku ground his teeth. 13, protect the students. Those are villains. The class cowered at the idea of an attack. Anyone who had wondered what was going on shut up the moment Aizawa spoke out. Izuku watched in disbelief as Aizawa pulled on his goggles, completing the persona of Eraserhead. He might have spoken out if Aizawa's song didn't sound eager. Resigned, as always, but ready to face the crowd on the ground. Eraserhead leapt over the steps, reaping the villains below much more easily than anyone save for 13 seemed to have believed possible. People began talking about censors. Todoroki shut them all down. Izuku frowned. Everyone was on the edge of panic. No one was developing a plan. A bunch of students were just standing around waiting to be attacked. He was about to say something when music erupted from the air behind him. Greetings. We are the League of Villains. We've come before you, scions of heroism, today so that we might have the symbol of peace draw his last breath. Please forgive our audacity. Izuku's eyes settled on the metal brace beneath the eyes. The villain's quirk was definitely a warp quirk. His actions, and the tendency of his song to drop out suddenly and reappear somewhere close by were both telling. For a villain, though he was well put together, he sounded like smooth jazz in an empty bar, confident that someone would come, staring at a telephone waiting for someone to call. A follower, someone who was enacting a plan and confident in his ability to carry it out. The only thing that jumped out at Izuku was confidence, and a strange static clinging to the man like an echo of someone else. An echo that felt familiar, if vague. You seem aware of our plans. Pray tell, were you informed of our coming? And where is All Might? Was he not supposed to be here? Was the schedule changed? Izuku scowled. Bakugo's storm was firing lightning bolts like crazy. Enough fear dripped from the class that Izuku felt as though he was standing in a swamp of terror. Oh, no matter. My role. Kaken. The brace. F off Deku. Kirishima was right there beside Bakugo as the blonde leapt to attack. The warp user flinched away in surprise as they attacked. Izuku cursed. Young you may be, but you are the golden eggs of Yui, after all. The best of the best indeed. But 1 second before his action, the villain's song peaked. Izuku leapt backward and rolled, narrowly avoiding being caught in the mist. When the mist cleared, Ashido, Siro, Sato, Uraraka, Ida and Shoji stood between the villain and 13. Everyone else had disappeared. What happened? Where is everyone? Ida shouted. Shoji spread his arms and wriggled before confirming that everyone was still in the facility. 13 took to convincing Ida to run. Izuku watched from the background, concentrating. He could feel the songs of his classmates in front of him, and the facility was buzzing with songs. Picking through each one would take time if he kept the volume down. Your quirk doesn't make sense. Izuku's eyes widened as an idea came to him. He remembered trying to take hold of the songs in the cafeteria. In the back of his mind he remembered the songs of his classmates. USJ was massive, and they were scattered. Reaching them would be impossible. Izuku ground his teeth and reached. For 10 years, he'd been careful. People didn't understand him. Most thought he was just lying. He tiptoed about, learning about his quirk as much as he could without pushing anyone. It was time to test his limits. 13 was telling Ida to run back to the school. That was a good plan. But if 13 attacked the portal villain with a physical disintegration, everyone. Izuku placed himself between his classmates and the villain. I have a plan. Releasing the locks on his quirk wasn't easy. He'd screwed himself shut as tightly as possible in case of annoying his classmates or his teachers. At first things came out stuttering. Ashido-san, Sato-san, we need to keep him busy. If Ashido-san throws acid and Sato-san attacks from the back, you should be able to keep him distracted. Uraraka-san, Shiro-san, try getting a hold on him and we'll go for the capture. Ida-san do as 13-sensei says. Shoji-san, please cover his retreat. Midoriya-kun, you shouldn't. Sensei, you're not a good match against him. Izuku didn't turn around. He locked eyes with the villain and took a deep breath. We need to keep him distracted. Even in a situation like this, who in their right mind reveals their plan to the enemy? As the villain flared up in anticipation of the fight, Izuku exhaled the breath he was holding and reached. Every song in the USJ stood out like bubbles surrounding their person. Izuku felt through the mess for the familiar ones and touched them, even those two he didn't want to grab hold of. Dizziness swept over him as he took hold of their songs, using even the most tenuous connection to grip them. 22 songs flowed through him, in addition to his 9. He ground his teeth and tuned them, matching the rhythms of each one to his own and letting his song flow into them. Just as Uraraka's song had flowed into him during the battle trial, and All Might's song flowed through One for All. We're going to defeat you, he told the villain. Oh, how? The villain chuckled. Izuku grinned. Then Izuku took hold of One for All. Everyone in USJ, villain or hero, felt the result. Izuku had unleashed a storm in the facility, and everyone linked to him may as well have been struck by lightning. They played their own song loud enough for others to hear, aware of the fact that they were a part of something bigger. Wherever there was more than one, the songs blended together to create a concert of sound. Portal Villain hesitated and fell back in the face of the noise, uncertain of what was happening. Sweat beaded on Izuku's forehead as he gripped everyone's song. Plus, Ultra! He shouted, even though he wasn't sure if they could hear it through his song. Izuku roared the motto as loud as he could, trying to reach all of them and maybe push that fake bravado into his song. Around him, his classmates rushed forward echoing the cry. When he felt the songs within his grasp begin to pulse with confidence, keeping time with the rest of them, he loosened his grip just enough to lose hold of the more difficult ones. Even without his hold, they remained on the same wavelength. His body strained with the power of his quirk, and Izuku held on for dear life. Shota moved between enemies with mechanical precision. Against a crowd of lowlifes, he barely had to think. Half of the time he was focusing on where the leader of the villains stood, right beside the monster that made Shota's spine crawl, more than taking down his prey. It started as a tickle. Something pulled at his thoughts as if he'd walked through a doorway. A buzz started up, just beyond his hearing, and Shota ignored it. When he heard the music, he paused. Everyone in the plaza did. The leader was frozen mid-lunge, as if he had just been about to move. Villains within 5 meters backed away, and Shota was left wide-eyed as they stopped to listen. Gradually, he became aware of the songs coming from the rest of the facility, of the multiple songs fusing together and beating through his chest, of the energy that was flowing through the songs. His heart beat faster with each moment it played, and he felt manic. Some part of him registered that this was Midoriya's doing. Part of him registered that his students were there in the mess of songs beating through him, and they were okay. He stepped out, surrendering himself to the beat. Dancing had never been his strong suit, but fighting? That he could do. No one was sure what the music was, or how to comprehend it. Shota bared his teeth in a smile, remembering when he'd first seen Midoriya's quirk explode like this. Fear couldn't describe how he'd felt in the face of this music. Now he was dancing to his song, and they were trapped on the floor with him. Eraserhead lunged and flipped through the crowd like an angel of death chaining prisoners to hell. Izuku grinned when Shoji caught the portal in his arms and Ida finally made it to the doors. Everyone had managed to keep the villain on his toes during the fight. A few strands of tape hung from the brace around his neck as he backed up towards the stairs, facing all of them down as Ida tore out of the "Damn it all, I seem to have failed. That's game over." The villain slipped into the floor with his words, leaving them all to sigh in relief and take a breath. Izuku groaned as he held on to the connection. Holding one for all in his body was taxing. One move, and he'd break himself. Midoriya? Ashido frowned. They were noticing now and turning to face him. Are you all right? Uraraka was the only one who ran to him. Linked as they were, he could feel the uncertainty in their songs. I can't move. He glanced at Uraraka and managed a weak smile. I'm keeping everyone connected. But my quirk, if I let up, they may trip up. Midoriya. We've won. You can release your quirk. Izuku looked up at 13. But everyone. They'll be fine. Take care of yourself too. Izuku sighed and released the connection. He nearly collapsed from exhaustion when the music calmed down. Something told him they wouldn't fall out of sync easily, but it nagged at him nonetheless. If anyone was hurt because he couldn't control his quirk better, you all need to evacuate. 13 was shouting over them, now. Sensei, wait. 13 looked down at him. There's something down there. A monster with multiple quirks. Aizawa-sensei is fighting the crowd, but if that thing moves, he doesn't stand a chance. We need to help him. I'll go, Midoriya, but you all need to get out of here. We're here to protect you after all. Midoriya. 13 cut him off. He bit his lip and nodded. 13 turned towards the stairs and hurried down the steps, leaving them all feeling a bit hollow. In the wake of Izuku's connection, they felt alone. Useless even. Each song in the entrance rang with that same sorry peal. Izuku reached out again, looking for the songs. Beneath them, in the plaza, Eraserhead was still fighting. He held the advantage for a moment. Their boss hadn't moved, and Izuku was glad. As long as that monster beside him didn't move, they had a chance. Midoriya, we should get out, Uraraka muttered. But I want to stay here. Just in case. No one objected to that. Izuku bit his lip, then took a gamble and reached out to his left, where a silent song beat quietly in its cage. He reached out and touched it, then fed his worry into it and linked him to Eraserhead. If it's him, maybe we can stop them. Shota felt the music taper off as he tossed a pair of goons to the edge of the plaza. They were barely worth being called henchmen, let alone villains. His music didn't disappear entirely. He could feel it humming through him, ready to devour the next quirk he looked at and whoever stood before him along with it. It filled him with a confidence that he never thought he needed. Vaguely, he was aware of 13 running down the steps and the portal villain rising from the stone beside the leader. Shigaraki Tamura. Kurojairi, the leader rasped. Shota filed their names away for later. What happened? 13 is here. I was unable to fight off the students. One of them escaped. Shigaraki growled. Shota scowled in disgust as the leader began scratching his neck like an animal. If you weren't a warp gate, I'd kill you. They're all coming. We don't stand a chance. We need to leave. Shota's stomach churned when Mineta gave a small cheer. They'd been so close to the stairs. He caught sight of 13 pushing them up the steps before slowly entering the plaza. But you know, just leaving like that doesn't sit right with me. We came to send a message, at least. Never in his life had Shota ever felt the air physically go stale the way it did at that moment. Midoriya's quirk died, along with 13 and Shota's songs. Nothing moved for a breath, and Shota felt fear ripple down his spine in anticipation of the next move. Nomu. The beaked monster perked up. The tugging sensation returned, and Midoriya's quirk buzzed to life in the back of his mind. Midoriya was exhausted. Despite the energy rippling through the song, the impact was low. Still he felt determination cover the fear tainting the air. A moment later his song flared to life, along with 13ths and a quiet, steady beat to their left. Behind the villains, a storm thundered to life, bolstered by something tossed about in the sea beneath it. None of it made any sense, and yet each song beat in time with Shota's pulse. The villains hadn't heard it yet. Shota grinned despite himself. Shigaraki hadn't finished pointing his finger yet when the ice and the storm tore into the plaza. Nomu was frozen solid, motionless as ever, while Kurogiri was caught beneath. Bakugo's blasts and Kirishima's sharpened hands. Eraserhead moved in, eyes locked on the leader. A quick series of blows knocked Shigaraki to the side and bullied him away from Nomu, just enough for 13 to make his move. Nomu. Shigaraki faltered when he saw the beast begin to disintegrate, and was felled by Eraserhead's knee slamming into his diaphragm and cutting him off. The move was over in a minute, and the villains were incapacitated. Quietly, Midoriya's Quirk faded from the facility and Shota was left to re-evaluate his student. When the door blew off the hinges and All Might came storming in, Shota smirked up at him. Izuku gasped for breath as he let go for the second time. He could feel All Might getting close, and the fight below was all but finished. Uraraka grabbed his shoulder in panic. Midoriya. I'm fine. His voice broke and came out raspy. Suddenly he needed water, desperately. You're shaking. Uraraka yelped. Plus, Ultra, he hissed as he forced himself to stand and stumble towards the steps. Then the door blew off its hinges and a lot happened at once. It didn't take long for him to realize what happened. All Might entered like a titan staring down at the villains, who'd all been defeated. The portal villain took it as his cue and opened a pair of portals, sinking both himself and the handyman, who'd been tied up in Erase Riyadh's capture weapon, but left on the ground, into the floor. When the portals closed, Bakugo threw a fit and Eraserhead stared at the floor as if it had betrayed him. Izuku was glad they were gone. Handyman's song made him want to vomit almost as much as that monster's song had. With All Might so close, he finally felt safe. Safe enough to let himself collapse, and the darkness close in on his vision. The bus ride back to campus was quiet. Once they'd talked to the police, the gravity of it all had set in. Somehow, they'd faced villains and avoided being injured. But even more than that, Bakugo. Everyone turned when Yaoyorozu spoke up. Bakugo turned his head and scowled at her. What happened back there? That was Midoriya's Quirk, right? Who the F cares? Bakugo muttered. Kyoka sighed. Just tell her a-hole. She barked. Bakugo glared at her and she glared back. Yeah, it was that BSDRD's Quirk. What of it? Bakugo spat. It was so different from the last time. Yaoyorozu trailed off, twirling a bit of her ponytail in her lap. Kyoka stared at her hands. None of them knew the half of it. When the music had started, Kyoka had nearly lost her mind. All over the facility, music had erupted from the students. At first it had been painful and confusing. She almost lost her grip on the short sword Yaoyorozu had made for her. Suddenly she wasn't standing on the mountain anymore. She was riding the music like a wave, caught in the rush. Fear hummed through her bones and made her jittery. Excitement pulled at the edges of her smile, forcing her to grin. Anxiety and insecurity were drowned out by confidence and absolute certainty, all coming from different people. Kyoka had been aware that the song in the mountain was smaller, consistent of only her, Yaoyorozu, and Kaminari. It was a nice song, but she'd heard something else too. From the entranceway, she could feel the source of it all humming like a massive speaker turned on max volume. Faintly, she recognized the pieces from across USJ coming together in a massive symphony, as if Midoriya was weaving the sun, stars, and the entire planet into a song and playing the voice of the people for the vocals. All the sounds in the song made her feel. Somehow, in the span of a moment, she felt her classmates pouring through her like a current. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Like staring into an abyss of things Kyoka wasn't even sure she wanted to understand. You all felt it too, right? When he yelled. Ashido asked hesitantly. Everyone nodded or shrugged. I didn't hear him yell, but I could feel it. Ojiro twisted his hands. What was that? That fucker's Quirk. Bakugo hissed, it's why Deku is F-ed in the head. Hey! Uraraka shot to her feet. Don't you dare say that. If he hadn't done what he did, who knows what would have happened. Nothing, round face. Bakugo barked. It's a useless Quirk, just like Deku. Didn't stop him from kicking your butt. Kaminari muttered. Bakugo growled but didn't fight back. Kyoka smirked. Whatever that was, Kirishima stared at the ceiling, I think we owe Midoriya a thank you. What he did was pretty manly. She frowned. Midoriya had been carried out on a stretcher and took an ambulance back to the nurse's office. 13 had said something about extreme exhaustion. Were the villains scary in the first place? Had Midoriya actually saved them? Kyoka didn't want to think about what would have happened if they'd been alone. She agreed with Uraraka. For some reason, Midoriya had done something important. Izuku groaned as he woke up. The world was fuzzy and quiet, which was good and bad. When he tried sitting up, a hand pushed him back to the bed. I'm glad you're awake, young Midoriya. Izuku gave All Might a faint smile. They're all okay, right? The words strained his throat, but he'd spoken before he even realized it. All Might grinned. Yes. Everyone made it out safely. Gee, good. Izuku relaxed a bit. Recovery Girl shuffled into view at the end of the bed. Somehow, you managed not injure yourself this time. But exhausting your Quirk is almost as bad, you know. The old woman told him. Izuku glanced at All Might. I'm not sorry, Izuku managed. Recovery Girl sighed. Geez, you boys are going to be the death of me. All Might cleared his throat when she was finished, and Izuku spun to face him. Young Midoriya, what happened? Everyone mentioned you used your Quirk, but they seemed confused about what you did. I'd like to be able to tell Aizawa. All Might looked cautious. As if he were worried Izuku would run away, or be offended. Izuku wasn't sure what to make of that. Oh, Izuku's head ached a bit, but he pushed it out of the way. I just played everyone's songs. Use real words, boy. Explain it so that we can understand. Recovery Girl called. All Might chuckled. I've experienced something like that before, my boy. But, All Might spread his hands as if he were grasping at straws. Izuku took the hint and nodded. When they all got scattered, I was at the entrance. My Quirk lets me hear songs, but sometimes I just sense them on the edge of things, you know? Like peripheral vision. I never really tried it before, so I kind of reached out and grabbed onto everyone. Then I let the songs play out loud and I tuned them so that we were all on the same, wavelength? I don't know, it's hard to describe. You tuned them? All Might frowned. Izuku sighed. I can play with the songs, you know? Not interfere or change them, I can only do that to my own song. But people's hearts beat in time with their song. And I think, maybe, that it helps keep rhythm with how you move. So when I tuned the songs and made sure everyone was on the same wavelength, I kinda forced myself to be confident. And that rippled through the chain. Plus, Izuku liked his lips and took a breath. Plus, when everyone was connected, I think it helped calm everyone down. All Might laughed when he managed a weak smile. My boy. I'm shocked each and every day by how much you grow. I'm proud of you, you know that? All Might tapped the end of the bed, careful not to touch Recovery Girl's patient. Izuku felt tears well up in his eyes. Don't start. You're dehydrated as it is. Recovery Girl smiled at him, despite snapping. I guess I can't be mad if I'm hearing you right. Although, you should try not to push yourself so much. Izuku nodded, sealing his lips tight against the faint cries that tried to escape him. Rest up, young Midoriya. Your mother will be here to pick you up soon. All Might sat with him for a few minutes before he slipped into a doze, and before he knew it, he was heading home. Izuku was used to being trapped in darkness. Listening to songs for so long had taught him how to really listen to something, how to block out everything else until the sound rang all around the void and through your person. He knew how to open himself to the sounds and how even regular music could be felt. This wasn't that type of darkness. Voice whispered things and laughed at him. When he asked, It yelled at him and turned into hushed whispers. The darkness pulled at his gym uniform, dragging him deeper and yanking on any part that it could grip. He moved through the darkness as if it were quicksand, all the while dreading the sounds waiting for him at the bottom. Slowly the voices faded, and the sounds grew louder. Behind him, he could hear the song of the monster. He knew it was dead, but he'd touched it when he was looking for Izawa. It didn't take much to guess why that song was a part of his nightmare. It was mostly screams of agony, the feeling of being stitched together and torn apart from the inside out. Pain was all that was left of the human song. As if that weren't enough, someone had taken those screams and spun them into a net, caging 4 quirks inside it like angry hornets. Izuku could hear them and he could guess what they were. But it's dead. 13 killed it and no one was hurt. Izuku ground his teeth and ignored that song. A few moments later he realized just how much of a mistake shutting out the first song was. The second song was chaotic and listless. Game noises, classic and new, blared through it and twisted the emotions inside into a broken electronic tune. A voice like a child's wailed and screamed in rage at the front. Izuku could hear the same child crying beneath the layered vocals. Rusted metal and fresh rot filled his nose as he sank into the shadows, drawing closer and closer to the noise. Familiar static traced the edges of the song like a cobweb. Deep inside Izuku's chest, he felt something flutter. He giggled, then slapped a hand over his mouth. Even though he wanted to be sick, he giggled like a drunk. Madness. His eyes widened. He'd wanted to ignore the bloodlust clinging to the song like a broken scab. He'd never wanted to feel like a child drowning in a swamp of blood. The song continued like nails on a chalkboard, digging into his ears while it made him laugh out loud. Izuku had never wanted to feel Tip All Might to pieces. The voice pulled at the edges of the song, plucking notes that shouldn't have been there and throwing the whole thing even further off tune. Trapped in the sticky, tar-black void, Izuku screamed. "We've got nothing on a Shigaraki Tamura or a man named Kurogiri possessing a warp quirk in any registry," Tsukachi said. "We've interrogated everyone caught by Eraserhead during the event, and we've even got sketches of both of them. But so far, we've got no leads on either. The Nomu that was caught and injured with 13's black hole has regenerated, but won't respond to any sort of communications. It's entirely comatose, besides breathing, eating, and drinking." "I see. Thank you for your report, Detective. Was there anything else that stuck out?" Nizu quipped. Tsukachi frowned. "Only one. They were recruited by what they call the League of Villains to kill the symbol of peace. Each of the villains we picked up said the same thing. Apparently Nomu was the weapon that would do the trick, but we've seen how that turned out." Tsukachi coughed into his hand. "Speaking of which, everyone at the scene mentioned a boy, someone named Midoriya? He was sent to Recovery Girl after the attack, so we never got to talk to him. Is he all right?" Shota sighed when the room glanced his direction. Once upon a time, he'd thought Midoriya would be a problem because of how quiet and undisciplined he was. He had a sinking feeling that Midoriya would be an entirely different kind of headache. According to Recovery Girl, he overused his quirk during the incident. Shota grumbled. No one really questioned him further, though 13 decided to speak up. "Speaking of Midoriya, his quirk, I'm not entirely certain what it is. What happened during the incident was incredibly odd." Shota really didn't want to talk about it. Midoriya's quirk was Pandora's box, as far as he was concerned, and talking about it would do no one any good. But Nizu had that glint in his eyes. "How do you mean? Did he do something during the event? Haven't you read the police reports?" Shota sighed. Nizu doesn't bother answering that. 13 squirmed in their chair. "I'd like to hear it from someone who was there." Nizu's voice was calm and level. Every word sent a chill down Shota's spine. 13 hesitated before speaking up to answer. "At first, he was fine. I didn't even notice him. But when... Actually, right before the villains showed up, he knew something was going to happen. He panicked and said we needed to leave, as if he were afraid for his life. Then the portal opened." Shota frowned. 13 continued. "What doesn't make sense is the scope of his power. Sensory quirks are odd, of course. But when he used his quirk on the students, It felt like everyone was connected. I couldn't even begin to describe what we heard. The music was beyond me. Everyone affected felt something though. Midoriya overwrote their panic and fear and encouraged them to fight. Somehow it felt as if they could predict each other as well. Like an experienced pair of pros who know one another well. He never moved while using his quirk. It drove him pass out from overuse. But somehow, he managed to gather everyone and make planning the fight basically unnecessary, on top of turning an ambush into a fair fight. A quirk able to synchronize a group that large. Sounds like Mandalay. Snipe offered. Not a bad thought. But 13 is right. Midoriya's quirk was a lot more. When we took down that Nomu, it allowed us to seamlessly plan an ambush without any sort of communication. He was directing us the entire time, pushing the students and improving their combat skills. The villains hesitated too. Anyone would in the face of that kind of noise. Shota told them. Snipe tapped their mask. If I may, All Might coughed weakly and leaned over the table. Everyone looked a bit shocked to hear from him. I met young Midoriya on an incident before this year. The slime villain that attacked 10 months ago actually attacked young Midoriya before young Bakugo. I talked to him a bit. Apparently, his quirk grants him a bit of... I think the only way to describe it is a premonition. How so? 13 blinked. He said that, before the villain attacked, the music changed to something dark. This is just a guess, but I've thought about it quite a bit since seeing him in action. He's lived with it for so long that he reacts to it instinctually, turning even a few seconds of advance notice into a rather large advantage. All Might offered. Everyone seemed less than happy with that answer, but it was something. A piece of the key to a box Shota didn't want anything to do with. How interesting. I look forward to seeing how he develops these abilities. In the meantime, if you're curious, 13-kun, please feel free to call Midoriya in for a chat. I'd love to hear what he has to say. Nizu's smile looked more like a scalpel than the grin of something living. 13 hummed, but didn't say anything else. Shota wasn't entirely sure what to make of Midoriya. It had barely been a week since classes started, and the green-haired troublemaker had gone from the bottom of his class rank to the top in a rather spectacular fashion, all while keeping everyone in the dark about just what the hell his quirk actually did. As they filed out after the meeting, he heard someone mutter something about the sports festival and how that the first-year stage will be interesting. He couldn't help but agree. ACT, Midoriya is nosy and no one knows how to deal. Tenya is the first into the classroom. He always has been and he always will be. Except when he isn't. Finding Midoriya poring over notes from the previous week with a frustrated expression is both confusing and excellent. Tenya was glad to see another student taking initiative. Or he would have been if Midoriya didn't look as if he hadn't slept at all in the time since they had seen one another. At first Tenya wanted to say hello, but Midoriya hadn't noticed him come in. Before Tenya could even make his way across the room, Midoriya got frustrated enough to groan aloud and snap his mechanical pencil in half. The sound of Midoriya's head hitting the desk was a bit too solid for Tenya to be anything other than worried about his classmate. Midoriya-kun, please, don't take your frustration out on your school supplies. Tenya's hand shot out towards the desk for emphasis. Midoriya groaned something unintelligible through his desk and notebook. I can't hear you, Midoriya-kun. Please sit up properly. Watching Midoriya pick himself up was very similar to watching a zombie rise from the grave, and the look he shot Tenya could be a certified hero attack. Tenya suddenly felt very small beneath the haunted green glare. Do your notes talk back to you, Ida-san? Tenya's mouth opened, though no words came out. Memories of Midoriya's quirk, and the music he heard, played back through Tenya's mind and he had no response for that. Midoriya's hands settled on the open book, all while the glare remained level on Tenya, and the sounds began to play through their empty classroom. For the third time in a week, Tenya had to force himself to breathe after hearing Midoriya's quirk. He can't help feeling a bit uncomfortable because each time has made him feel a shockingly different set of emotions. Midoriya's notebook didn't sound like any sort of music Tenya knew. It sounded as if 100 different people were trying to whisper different things in his ear. For a brief moment he tried to listen and found himself hearing 100 different tales of history in too much detail. Stories of librarians and wars and shoguns and emperors and harlots, interwoven into a history that's far too deep, too real for him to even comprehend. 3 minutes passed before he forced himself to blink and stare down at the notebook, and the kanji written in Midoriya's, shaky but legible, hand. What? We use language to do just about everything, Ida-san. Midoriya growled. Try taking notes while your writing tells you all the things it's seen. Tenya's mouth was suddenly very dry. Slowly he'd learned bits and pieces about Midoriya's quirk, but none of it really made much sense, although, when he thought about what Midoriya said, it's a surprisingly simple conclusion. He wandered to his desk and watched as Midoriya reread his notes, constantly on the edge of ripping out his hair for the next 30 minutes. Each student who entered the room afterwards took one look at Midoriya and immediately looked to someone else for help. Seeing Todoroki, who froze a building hole, look to Ida with a worried expression on his face only made Tenya worry for Midoriya even more. Watching Uraraka sidle past his desk, trying hard to look the other way and ignore the boy's muttering, made nearly everyone cringe out of sympathy. Bakugo barely batted an eye. Tenya isn't entirely sure what to think of his time at Yui yet. His teachers, and Midoriya, for some strange reason, deviated from every expectation he'd had. You don't have time to rest yet? Izuku felt something crawling up his spine as his teacher shifted to look directly at him. The UA Sports Festival is coming up soon. The class erupted into shouts of surprise. Why everyone thought that the sports festival was normal was beyond him. But didn't the school just get attacked by villains? Even if no one was hurt? It's necessary, both to demonstrate that UE's security is foolproof, and to give our students their chance. This even isn't something we can afford to simply cancel. Aizawa answered the outburst. A few watery chimes rang out through the class. Izuku didn't blame them. Part of him wanted to tell them how the festival changed things, how happy people were while it was going on. It brought people together in a way that few events could, and made people sing with more determination than before. But he couldn't, so he sat quietly. Aizawa heard it, though, and spoke up again. Security will be 5 times what it's been in previous years. On top of having Endeavor and All Might in attendance, Izuku blinked when he heard Shoto's song Hiccup. Usually he was quiet as a mouse, and besides, this is one of the events that the entirety of Japan looks forward to. Canceling this would be the equivalent of canceling one of the world's sporting events of the past. Before any of them could decide that having just been the subject of a villain attack was a little more important, Aizawa continued. This event gives our students the chance to be scouted by the pro-hero community. 3rd years will receive offers to become sidekicks. 2nd years will be checked for growth. 1st years will be scouted to see which of you should be listed as an interest. The sports festival creates opportunity for every level of our curriculum. Aizawa swept his gaze over them all. Be prepared. You only get 3 chances to make your mark on the world. You can't afford to miss this, and we refuse to let you over something as frivolous as big-headed villains. Izuku couldn't help but remember his nightmares. Monsters with multiple quirks, strung together with needle and thread, and a villain drenched in bloodlust and madness. A group watching them, waiting for them to drop their guard. Waiting to kill All Might. The receding symbol of peace. He let himself drown in the surging anticipation of his classmates instead of thinking about that. Izuku watched Cementos leave the classroom and flinched as the class erupted. Everyone had been barely holding in their excitement from Aizawa's speech, and it was stretched to the point of breaking out regardless of PRD. His head was still pounding from a lack of sleep, and being trapped in the mess wasn't helping, but he focused on them anyway. Kirishima's song marched onward at a jog, ready to break and run for the finish. His song and his quirk don't seem entirely in tune yet, which is worrisome but not nearly as much as some of their other classmates. Izuku likened his song to a mountain jog, though it changed almost every day, always some sort of exercise, usually tinged with a sunny rainstorm, and watched as it leaked to their classmates. Uraraka's song changed as well, filling her bubbles with bursts of fire and replacing the childish laughter with the sounds of a spring storm crashing through branches. Bakugo's storm changed so that he glided through the bolts of lightning and the torrential rain, staring at the crowd of people beneath him, Izuku wanted to grin when he noticed that Bakugo was significantly lower to the ground than before, but he hid it in the interest of surviving the day. All in all, everyone was being riled up, save for Todoroki, who was basically unshakable, and Shoji. Izuku could feel a little bit of happiness in Shoji's tune. Before he made it to the door, Ida caught him for a friendly talk. Izuku couldn't help feel a bit bad about how he'd spoken to the class rep that morning, but Ida, despite the tension underlying his song, was determined. Seeing the serious boy do a little dance of excitement made Izuku want to bust out laughing, but he kept it in his chest and smiled instead. "I'm glad you're excited, Ida-san." "Midoriya-kun, Ida-kun." Izuku flinched as Uraraka unleashed the fiery bubbles in a flood. Her gaze settled on them, making him take a hasty step back. "Let's do our best." Everyone paused as she slipped out of character. Her second battle cry caught Kirishima and Ishido, startling everyone even more. Not for the first time in his life, Izuku hated his quirk. There was something buried deep beneath Uraraka's song that he'd been avoiding for a while now. A shadow that hung over the bubbliness of her heart. He was all too familiar with that shadow. Echoes of an empty stomach and the scrape of bare floorboards played inconsistently in the depths of her fire, feeding the determination until it boiled over. He watched them smile at one another, listening to the cracks and the missed notes and the echoes of things people didn't want to talk about. After a few minutes, his chest tightened enough that he turned and walked out of the room. "It's none of my business." Izuku chewed his lip. "Leave them alone already. Even if they're friendly." He paused when All Might's song reached him. It was quiet today. When All Might pulled out his lunch, a trill similar to a magical girl show pealed out and Izuku had to bite back another laugh. "Want to eat lunch together?" Tea steamed on the table as All Might took his seat. Izuku watched him carefully. All Might was worried about something, which was never a good thing. "You talked about the sports festival in class today, yes?" Izuku nodded. All Might pointed a finger at him. "You still can't regulate one." "For all, can you?" Izuku pet his head. "You know I can, don't you?" he asked. All Might spewed blood from the sides of his mouth. Sorry. I thought you knew. You've come to the beach a few times when I was practicing." "You knew?" All Might wiped the blood up with a tissue and glanced up at Izuku. Izuku nodded, tightening his hands around one another. "I get caught up in my quirk, but I can still tell sometimes." "Why didn't you say anything?" All Might muttered. Izuku smiled weakly. "I didn't want to overstep." "You always left after a little while, so I thought you didn't want to talk about it." All Might sighed. "Young Midoriya, not much gets by you." "I'm sorry." Izuku blushed. "Don't apologize, my boy. Let's talk about one for all." All Might's eyes glinted. "How much can you use safely?" Izuku took a deep breath and felt the power humming in his chest. "Not much. Even with my quirk, I can barely power up at all. One for all doesn't like being controlled." "Not surprising. Could you show me?" Izuku nodded and tuned One for All to his song. After a few seconds the power flowed through his body. He could feel his body humming in tune with One for All, beating like a giant speaker and throwing off arcs of green lightning when the song peaked. When he was stable, he stood up and flexed against the limit his body could handle, causing his body to groan in response. "I think it's only a fraction of One for All, not even a tenth of the full power," Izuku muttered. All Might swelled into his hero form and held out a hand. "Let's test it out." Izuku frowned and nodded. "All right," he swung, striking All Might's open hand hard enough that a breeze blew through the room. All Might nodded. "It's definitely lower than 10%. But you're moving. That's what matters. You've managed to take the power and make it your own. I'm proud of you." Izuku stared at All Might for a moment. "Young Midoriya? Is something the matter?" Sorry, no. "I'm fine." Izuku's hair fell back into his face as he released his quirk and let it fade from his body. For a moment he'd felt something. Almost like a resonation between All Might and his punch. Was that the embers of One for All, or was that something he could use with other people too? Anyways, now that you've got a hold on One for All, I'd like to ask you something. Izuku felt the ominous tones, tinged with All Might's ever-constant hope, begin to hum through the room. He knew what was coming. My time as the symbol of peace is waning. If that attack yesterday had gone differently, I'm certain I'd have been pushed beyond my limit. You were there, and you stopped them with your power. You've proved every time that you are the one worthy of one for all, and now you'll be on a stage with the entire world watching. It's time for you to tell them that my successor, the fledgling symbol, has come to save them. Tell the world I am here. Izuku flinched beneath All Might's presence. Even knowing it was coming, he couldn't stop himself. All Might was one of the greatest heroes for a reason. Is that really okay? All Might's moment shattered. The room went silent in the face of his question. Izuku swallowed the knot in his throat. Sorry, I can barely hold that power. And my quirk, if it acts up again, I could hurt people. Young Midoriya, let me confide in you a few things. All Might sighed. Your heart is in the right place. But the difference between those who aim for the top and those who don't, it will mark the difference between those in your class who succeed and those who don't. No one would ever be able to push their limits if they were constantly afraid of losing control and harming others. With my power, I could easily create disasters. But I've trained myself sufficiently. That, combined with that difference, with my drive to become the symbol of peace, make me who I am. Do not let yourself fall behind because you're afraid of hurting people, Midoriya. Izuku thought of the feeling he'd had during USJ. Holding his class together, straining against the aching muscles and the will to pass out beneath the strain of one for all. Your power is uniquely geared towards gaining attention, my boy. I believe you will do us both proud. All Might's hand landed on his shoulder. Izuku felt one for all resonate within his soul, as if mimicking the gesture. None of it did anything to fill the ache in his chest. A crowd was waiting outside the door. He could hear the choir growing, weaving together anxiety and curiosity and jealousy into a sound like a stomachache. More jealously made it even more green, more curiosity filled him with jitters, and people just kept coming. By now there had to be at least 30 or more people from every class in their year coming to gawk at them. Izuku was still left mostly alone, so he sat and watched nervously as his classmates headed towards the door. When the door slid open, Izuku had to clap his hands over his mouth to keep from being sick. One song in particular made his skin crawl and his stomach heave. The music slid across his skin, trying to get into his head and drown everything else out. He was lucky enough to clamp down and shut it out before losing his lunch. He'd done that once in middle school, when he'd first learned about those quirks. A purple-haired student was slipping through the crowd, facing Bakugo down. Izuku made a note to avoid that student at all costs. People like him were dangerous, even if their background noise said otherwise. Bakugo pushed through the crowd, though not before leaving a simple message to his classmates, as Bakugo will do. It's not like this changes anything. I'm aiming for the top. The difference between those who aim for the top and those who don't, it will mark the difference between those who succeed and those who don't. All Might had told him. Izuku frowned and stared at the door. There had never been a time when Bakugo wasn't destined for the top. He'd put everyone in the dirt as he learned the difference between himself and others, slowly transforming into a storm that would beat anyone and everyone into SBMson. Bakugo couldn't know the power of those who were actually pros. Izuku was sure that Bakugo could hold his own against some of them, but he'd be destroyed by others. Among his classmates, Izuku knew there were several who could make the pro industry. Nearly all of them actually. But some of them would fail if they kept doubting themselves. Slowly they began filing out. Izuku watched them and listened carefully. He knew the ones who would have trouble, and the ones who would probably figure it out on their own. If they had 2 weeks, could he save them all before the sports festival? Home had gotten better. Not great. But Izuku could always work with better. That night, over dinner, he told his mom about the sports festival. Worry infested her song, as it always did. For such a beautiful song, it had grown more and more strained over the years. Izuku really didn't want to think that chasing his dream was the cause, but he knew. Izuku always knew. He hated himself for it and drove onward anyways. She wished him good luck and asked him about training. He lied and told her that he had a pretty good idea of how he'd handle it. They retreated to their rooms too soon after dinner. Izuku tried to block out his quirk. Inko did her best to listen and try being comforted by the emptiness of their home. Izuku groaned as he jogged towards the school entrance. He'd overslept and was running late. A headache pounded through his head like an oblivious violin stretched against its will. Every other song on the train and the walk made his ears hurt, so he avoided people as much as possible. When he got to the classroom, everyone turned to look his way. Few of them waved a greeting, but his mood the past few mornings was enough that no one wanted to approach him. For the first time, he wished they all just get it over with. He could feel the anxiety, the anticipation, rising in everyone's song. They were just stuck until someone approached him first. Mind reading would have been a better quirk, Izuku thought. He wouldn't be able to read 19 minds at once, and he'd probably be able to deal with words better than music. At least then his notes wouldn't try to stuck him. Class skated by, making his headache consistently worse. Taking notes and working problems made him want to scream. He knew he was muttering and he was past caring. Ida and Uraraka tagged along with him during lunch, though they didn't say anything. Izuku realized as they walked into the hallway that it was more him tagging along with them and decided to try not to think about that. They'd waited for him after all. You look like you got run over by a truck. Izuku blinked. Jairu's soft jazz pulsed beside him. Unlike most songs, hers beat quietly on purpose. Acoustic music filled the air around her like weak smoke. Her voice filled the smoke, washing over him like sweet liquor. Quietly, beneath the smoke, something very unjazz-like rumbled. After a moment of getting lost in the tune, Izuku noticed how little it actually projected. She barely let herself be heard at all, which somehow let her sneak up on him despite having one of those songs that Izuku loved getting lost in. Most of the time songs projected the same way a person did. If you were close enough to hear them talk, you could hear their song. Izuku hummed to himself. He'd thought Jairu was a safe bet. Apparently, she needed to go on his list too. Is it that bad? Izuku grumbled. Jairu smirked. Uraraka smiled nervously and rubbed the back of her head. You've been a little scary lately, Midoriya-kun. Sorry. Izuku muttered. He eyed Jairu. Would you like to sit with us? The other two nodded along. Izuku was glad they were so welcoming. Jairu shrugged. I guess that works. I was hoping to talk to you anyways. They made small talk as they passed through the line, then found a table in the mess and took their seats. Ida took the seat beside Izuku, which surprised him. He'd thought Ida didn't want much to do with him after his mood. So, Jairu caught his attention. What's up with your quirk, anyways? Izuku ped his head to one side. You'll have be a little more specific? I thought it was some sort of weird amplification thing. But during USJ, I caught the full force of whatever you were doing. Now I'm even more confused than I was after the entrance tests. Jairu twirled a jack in one hand and kept stared at him with heavily lidded eyes. His quirk is really nice. Uraraka jumped in, smiling brightly. Izuku winced as her bubbles popped in his head, sending spikes of pain through his aching skull. Ida's monotone and Jairu's quiet song were working wonders, but they could only do so much. The music is super pretty, and it kept everyone safe during USJ. How exactly did you do what you did during USJ? Jairu snapped her fingers at Uraraka. Izuku frowned. It was just a guess. I projected my song to everyone, and they all ended up projecting because of me. I'm kind of like a speaker. He shrugged. More like a sound tech. Jairu sighed and took a bite of her meal. So, what we heard, that was what you hear all the time? Oh, yeah, just mind that. I can't really turn it off without trying really hard. But it's not exactly the same. What I hear is more fragmented. Everyone's songs play at once, so I need to sort through them. Izuku tapped his cheek with his chopsticks. That sounds very difficult. How did you manage to connect everyone at USJ? Ida asked quietly. Izuku shrugged. How do you change gears? Well, a feeling builds up in my legs, and when I feel as though I've covered the right distance, or my speed isn't sufficient, I focus on my legs and change gears. Ida pushed his glasses up his nose. Do you change one leg at a time? Izuku asked. Ida paused with a bit of rice halfway to his mouth. Is it a lever, like a manual transmission car, or more like a dial that you gradually turn? Ida's rice fell out of his grip onto the table. You run on orange juice, right? How does it flow to the engines in your legs? Izuku took a bite of some of his meal, then turned his eyes back to Ida and met the taller boy's wide stare. If you'd like, Ida-san, I can show you your song. Maybe if you think about it long enough you can figure it out. Midoriya-kun is scary when he's tired. Uraraka giggled. Jiru's smirk wavered, and her song became shy. Izuku hadn't. Thought she was the shy kind, but he was learning more and more with each passing moment. Actually, Izuku looked at his tray as Jiru spoke up. He knew what was coming. Curiosity was one of the emotions Izuku knew how to describe perfectly. If Jiru's song was a jazz club, the room was full of a cat's purr of curiosity. When the purr grew as loud as that, no one could stand it anymore. I wouldn't mind hearing mine. If you're offering. Izuku sighed. Why? Are you sure? I wouldn't have asked, Jiru frowned. Jiru-san. Let me explain my quirk a bit more. Izuku turned to look at Ida and Uraraka, who'd heard his quirk before. They seemed keen on him now. Everyone seemed full of the cat, grinning up at him like something out of those old American stories. He'd rarely ever been the subject of so much curiosity, and it tickled his nose as if the cat were waving its tail beneath his nose. Soul's song plays the emotions and physical condition of the people around me through music. That's the definition on my quirk form. Everyone nodded. Jiru leaned on one arm, twirling a jack around her finger as if she were bored. The light in her eyes and the way her song's vocals waited quietly told him she was anything but this. A window. Izuku gestured with his hands, staring at them instead of at the people sitting around him. Explaining things that people couldn't understand was awkward. Telling them his secrets was even more so. The song starts from the moment you're born and evolves as you grow up. Everyone's song changes with time, taking the parts that shape people. Emotions you feel all the time, even if you don't notice them or you don't want to think about them or you try to fight it. Blank stares. Izuku sighed. The other side, it plays up to a few moments of the future. Songs change to suit the environment they're into. I'm saying this because, well, even if it may not make sense at first, it's not really music. Listening to that, it can be overwhelming. Izuku wanted to tell them. Part of him wanted to take them back to the classroom and just ramble on about all the things he'd heard listening to the class. Ask Jiru why she was so shy about her talent. How Uraraka felt about her times being less than fortunate, about the hunger pains and the thinness of her mattress and why she didn't tell someone about living alone. Tell Kirishima that his quirk was strong and he'd learn that fear wasn't an insurmountable monster. All Might had guessed by now. His mother knew, but they'd never talk about it. No one wanted to know all the things he knew. Knowing that he'd heard their shame and their sadness and their fear, he might break them even more than they already were. Telling them wouldn't help. Izuku swallowed that desperate desire and forced himself to smile, however shaky it was. Maybe one day someone would ask. One day he'd be able to let it all out. With the sports festival on the horizon, no one needed know. You talk a lot, but you already said it wouldn't make sense explaining it. Jiru muttered. You're sure? Izuku asked. Jiru pet an eyebrow. Do you need to touch me? No. Izuku sighed. You just want to hear yours? Jiru frowned, then shut her eyes. When she looked up at him again, he saw something he didn't understand. An emotion that was still brewing, almost like a sound that hadn't matured. It whispered in the back of her mind, and the back of his. I want to hear what you hear. All of it. She said. Izuku frowned. It might not be easy on you. I don't care. Jiru crossed her arms. They were completely forgetting lunch now. Uraraka and Ida were watching them carefully. Izuku sighed. All right. You guys? He could tell already. Uraraka nodded. She'd been curious about his quirk specifically ever since her first experiences. Ida simply nodded. Give me a minute to figure this out. What? Jiru blinked. You don't know how? No one really liked hearing my quirk before Yui. Izuku muttered. I'm still figuring out the projecting parts. No one said anything after that. Izuku sighed and let his quirk go, feeling music pour from the world like an ocean of noise. The others couldn't hear it yet, judging from their nervously patient songs, still full of that maddening curiosity. Somehow, he'd trained his control during the past week that locking the sound away from others was thoughtless. One for All no longer played at full throttle 24/7, so that probably had something to do with it. He hesitated when he thought of Kyoka's sensitive hearing, and began adjusting the sensations of the music so that it wasn't entirely hearing. Kyoka crossed her arms and huffed. It's been almost 5 minutes, what? Everyone at the table froze. Uraraka and Ida both looked uncomfortable with the slight tugging sensation in their chests. Nothing happened at first. Izuku tugged at them with his quirk, then stopped. His face twisted for a moment, the first move he'd made in several minutes. After a moment of thought, he took a deep breath. Kyoka's eyes widened as she was drawn in. The tugging had disappeared entirely and was replaced by a vague sensation behind her eyes and spreading across her mind, as if some new limb was waking up. After a few moments, Kyoka felt something. Sensation on the edge of her mind, in the edge of her eye and just beyond her ears. Can you feel that? Izuku asked, face still twisted in concentration. Yeah, Uraraka whispered. Her face twisted in confusion. Kyoka sighed. Is this it? I'm trying to get the volume right. If I just dropped you in, Izuku huffed. Just do it already, would you? Kyoka felt her cheeks heat up. Izuku opened his eyes and frowned at her. For a moment she was worried. This was the boy who'd lost control and lit up the entire campus with his quirk, someone who faced Bakugo and one with the power to crush a building. Still, there was only the buzzing at the edge of her mind. Fine. Izuku shrugged. Another moment of silence passed. The feeling was something like being dropped into an ocean of noise. Suddenly everything around them sang, and the room sounded like 100 different concerts all at once. She couldn't hear anything over the force of the new sounds. It wasn't until she felt the tears drip onto her wrists that she realized she was crying and laughing all at the same time. Her classmates' emotions clawed at her skin like rabid animals, filling her body with tremors and her mind with images that overwhelmed her vision. A hand grabbed her shoulder and the noise receded. For a few moments, there was nothing. She'd shut her eyes against the onslaught of music and clutched her ears in vain. The only thing she heard was her heartbeat thundering through her body as she shivered. Kyoka frowned as something warm flooded her body. An impossible sound crooned quietly in her ear, reminding her of a warm blanket wrapped tight around her shoulders. Slowly the sound faded and she heard someone begin to sing. Deep, smoky notes grew louder as she craned her neck to listen. In the background, a steady beat played out, too familiar and too alien played through bass strings. She slouched in her chair, breathing in the deep smoke of a quiet room and good, heartfelt jazz music. The music washed over her, and she felt a smile tug at her lips. Memories played out in the notes, Kyoka learning the guitar from her father and listening to her mother sing for them after a rowdy dinner, learning to slow dance from her father as her mother played the piano and struggling with the drums when her father tried to teach her. Tears spilled down her face as she laughed. A hand still rubbing gentle circles on her back, whispering quietly as she returned from the vision. When she opened her eyes, she found Ida sighing and smiling in relief. Midoriya and Uraraka sat on either side of her, watching closely. She was shocked to see it was Midoriya rubbing her back and muttering under his breath. Her eyes widened as she felt his quirk fade. The gravity that had dragged them in faded from her mind, letting her vision fade into the back of her mind. Her voice cracked and she hurriedly cleared her throat. Midoriya smiled in relief, breaking the stony mask that he'd been wearing when she woke up. He slipped to the other side of the booth and took a breath, running a hand into his curls and tugging at his hair. Midoriya? Sorry, Jiraiya-san. Uraraka-san. Ida-san. Suddenly Midoriya looked really tired. More tired than Kyoka had noticed when she'd sidled up to him in the lunch line, which was saying something. I shouldn't have done that. Midoriya, was that how it is for you? Uraraka asked quietly. Kyoka was silently very glad that the bubbly brunette was sitting so close still. She felt cold. The last song was gone, leaving her feeling almost as if she were missing a piece of herself. Not that violent. Midoriya muttered, staring down at his lunch. But it's something like that. Kyoka glanced at Ida and frowned. The class representative was staring at the cafeteria as if he'd just gotten new glasses. She wasn't sure what he and Uraraka had heard, but it was probably much less violent than what she had. Her hearing made things like that far, far worse. Kyoka wanted to kick herself. She'd known. Midoriya had knocked them both out on the first day. Why had she pushed him? Just because he'd tried being nice? Because she was impatient? Or because she didn't want to deal with the weird kid any more than necessary? My quirk is a lot. Midoriya muttered quietly. Listening to it for little bits of time like that makes it worse. You can't really get a feel for what it's really like. At first, it's just a lot of noise. Midoriya. Kyoka's voice was raspy as she did her best to pull herself together. You shouldn't have to apologize. I was the one who asked. I should have listened to you. Midoriya smiled. Even if it was shaky, it was heartfelt. Kyoka couldn't help grinning back. Thank you, Jiru-san. Maybe next time we take it a bit more slowly? Uraraka chirped, smiling now that the tension was draining from the table. Midoriya paled and lost his smile. And next time? But, Jiru-san, she almost. And you both, why, you were almost shouting. I was overwhelmed. Ida pressed his glasses up his nose, still staring at the cafeteria. Jiru had trouble reading him, for all his studious expression and odd sort of innocence. My apologies. But I would not be opposed to trying again. Your quirk really is incredible. As class rep. All right. Kyoka smirked. If you guys are going to try, I'm in. Though, I'll have to be extra careful apparently. Jiru-san. Midoriya's eyes bugged out of his head. Kyoka shrugged. I've never heard music like that. I'm curious, she said. Midoriya groaned and hung his head. Hey, Midoriya? Kyoka picked at her food and took a bite. What was that last song that you played? The one to help me calm down. Midoriya glanced at the table and blushed visibly. Oh, that was you, Jiru-san. Kyoka pet an eyebrow at him. Uraraka tapped her shoulder, grinning wide. He means that was your song. The one he hears from you. Kyoka stared at Uraraka, then glanced at Midoriya's blush and felt a bit of heat creep into her own cheeks. He'd heard that? Just what had he seen when he listened? Oh. Kyoka managed. Uraraka nodded and turned back to her lunch. When they walked back to the classroom and she drifted towards Ishido, Kirishima and Kaminari, Kyoka couldn't help but feel like she hadn't learned anything at all. Izuku was nearly used to waking up in the middle of the night. Being chased out of his bed was about as terrifying as ever, but the exhaustion dragging on him was always the same. He made his way to the beach for some mediation and quirk training, then went through his normal routine. Luckily, his backpack was large and worn enough to function as a makeshift pillow in the empty classroom. Midoriya-kun. Unless Ida came barging in and chopping his way over to Izuku's desk. Morning people never seemed to understand the pleasure of catching little bites of sleep before the day began. Morning, Ida-sen. You're very early. And you seem tired. Have you been having trouble sleeping since USJ? Izuku wanted to slap himself. Or Ida. But that would be rude. Being rude to Ida wasn't justified yet. A yawn split his face nearly in half. No more than usual. Izuku groaned. If you're having trouble sleeping, you should find an activity that will help. Izuku groaned quietly to himself. If you'd like, we can try sparring after class? That made Izuku wake up. Sparring? Is that allowed? He asked. Ida nodded. Yes. We can use the gym, but we need to be out of school before the campus closes. Sparring would be an excellent way of training, and exhausting yourself may be helpful if you're having trouble sleeping. Izuku thought for a moment. His usually routine was grueling, but he'd gotten used to it. Maybe adding a little more wouldn't hurt. Asking All Might certainly wouldn't. I'll get back to you if that's okay? Ida nodded and started back towards his desk. A few steps away, he spun and chopped towards Izuku, making him jump. Midoriya-kun. Izuku blinked. Why yes. About your notes. And Ida cleared his throat. Izuku felt his throat tighten up when H remembered how he'd confronted Ida over the pencil snapping incident. If you'd like help studying, we can also go over our homework and notes. Verbally, of course. So that your quirk doesn't get in the way. Ida spoke a bit more quietly, eyes shining with empathy and genuine care. Izuku's chest tightened up and tears pricked his eyes. Thanks, Ida-san. That means a lot to me. Ida nodded, smiling. For a moment, his song wasn't just a simple up and down beat. It rumbled like a car flying along the coast with the windows down, full of laughter and innocent banter. Izuku made it through the day, luckily. Jiraiya waved a few times but didn't join them for lunch again. All Might grinned and wished him well with the sparring, which Izuku was grateful for. Facing down Uraraka wasn't supposed to be scary. Hitting a girl was probably supposed to be daunting. Maybe not if she knew it was coming, and he wasn't supposed to actually hit her, but facing female criminals meant that you had to be less than a gentleman, and the fact of the matter was that Uraraka wasn't going to get treated well by most criminals, but still. Midoriya-kun. I'm coming. Izuku's eyes widened as she rushed him. Panic overwhelmed him, but when he saw her hand heart forward, he dodged out of the way. Her combat will revolve around her hands, which means watch her shoulders and her waist, shorten your dodges, and when she goes to grab you, aim for the elbow, not the wrist, but otherwise. Izuku's next dodge barely slipped by her outstretched arm, in toward her chest. His feet slid into place automatically and he snagged her by the forearm and shoulder. Uraraka flipped over him easily and landed on her back, coughing. Uraraka-san. Midoriya-kun, this is match. Izuku flinched as Ida called him back. Uraraka struggled but got to her feet after a minute. Midoriya-kun, you used that flip on Bakugo too, didn't you? Izuku stared at his feet. Your styles are very similar? I'll take that as a compliment. Uraraka wiped her cheek and fell back into her stance. Izuku turned his gaze to the ceiling. Uraraka-san, I'm not sure about. He dodged as she came after him again, and again and again. Eventually he tripped her and caught her arm, deftly flipping her into a hold with her downward momentum. Once they were standing, Ida and Uraraka both turned on him. Midoriya-kun, you've gotta actually try if we're gonna spar. Really, Midoriya-kun, running away from a practice match is incredibly rude to your partner. Partner. Izuku glanced back and forth between them. I told you, I'm not sure I want to fight Uraraka-san. We'll never get better if we don't change things up. Uraraka puffed herself up. Izuku could hear fire racing through the strings of her song, warming her blood till she had no choice but to let it out somehow. I've never fought a girl. Izuku stammered. You're going to have to someday. May as well be now. No holding back, Midoriya-kun. They stood across from one another again, and Izuku did his best to calm himself. There's no way out of this, I guess. After a moment of breathing, he lowered his stance and pressed the rest of the world to the edge of his mind, letting Uraraka's song flow through his ears and his song hum through his muscles. One for All died down until his song was almost non-existent. Drifting in silence, Izuku heard Ida call the start and felt Uraraka's song begin to beat frantically. Her first strike was a straight punch to his head. As her song peaked and began to fall, Izuku reached out and deflected the blow. Quietly, his quirk began to come alive again, changing as Uraraka struck and reached for him. Each blow deflected gave him a little more of her pattern. Catching her between beats, when people were usually at their most vulnerable, was easier every time. Slowly the fight changed. Uraraka's song pulsed weakly as she realized what was happened and tried to retreat, falling as Izuku tripped her and twisted her into a hold. Izuku sighed and helped her up, releasing his quirk. You're really good, Uraraka-san. You should be careful of being so forward though. Ida and Uraraka both stared at him. Midoriya-kun, what was that? Ida asked measuredly. Part of Izuku cringed and drew inward. Whenever Ida talked like that, he was trying to be nice, but there was intensity to his gaze that Izuku didn't like. What do you mean? Uraraka groaned and wandered over to where they'd left her phone on recording. Watching the fight made him wince. That hold was a bit off, wasn't it? The other two shared a glance. Midoriya, fight Uraraka-kun without your quirk. Izuku blinked, but nodded. When they fell into their stances, Izuku drove every song from his brain and immersed himself in a void. One for All buzzed quietly in his gut, like the static tainting it. When Uraraka moved to take him, he barely dodged in time. Uraraka had him on the ropes, forcing him to dodge and stumble around until he spotted one of her tells and managed to avoid being driven out of their makeshift ring. He frowned and focused on her shoulders, waiting for her to rush in with her hands again. The kick came out of nowhere, putting him back on the run. Eventually Izuku was thrown into the air and left unable to continue, without using his quirk, at least. Uraraka released him and grinned. So it was your quirk? Izuku smiled and rubbed the back of his neck. Sorry. Midoriya-kun. Izuku yelped as Ida pointed towards him. I asked that because the way you fought before was completely different. Not because using your quirk was cheating. But still. Next time I'll just have to figure out a way around it. Uraraka giggled, still showing off that determination burning in her soul. Indeed. Your quirk is extremely versatile, Midoriya-kun. Now for our match. Izuku whined as Ida stepped onto the mat. Who, Ida-kun? But we just... Here I come, Midoriya-kun. Sparring was a good idea, in hindsight. Izuku stared at the ceiling from his floor, remembering how it felt to spar in tune with his classmates' songs. Uraraka's bubbles and the humming of Ida's engines drove away the screeching madness in the back of his mind, but it reminded him of something. Even though both Uraraka and Ida seemed to have a better idea of how to spar against people, their matches had gone significantly longer and been much more complicated than his. He'd won by listening to their songs. That, in and of itself, wasn't new. Soul's song had made dodging Bakugo so much easier back when they were young. Fighting was easy when you could hear attacks and tactics in the songs. Izuku had first-hand experience with almost everyone. Certain notes and changes were universal, especially in fighting. What was new was fighting back. Reaching into someone's attack just after the peak of their song and grabbing them. Tripping someone just as they were about to move. Knowing the moment someone's momentum was gone and utilizing that split second. Before, he hadn't fought back. It had never even occurred to him that knowing how someone was about to move would make fighting that much easier. Which was, frankly, stupid. The feeling of his song changing was strange. Not unusual, considering how often his song taunted his bad luck or how often he got in trouble. Feeling it change so quickly, in response to someone else's song was new. I'm adapting to my opponent, so maybe that's it? A yawn peeled Izuku's face back and left him staring at the ceiling again. Anyone directly countering someone would change their tune. Change their tune. Izuku was surprised at the intensity of class the next day. The material didn't change, but his classmates were much more into things. Almost all of them were talking about the festival or studying hard, or asking about teaming up for sparring and exercise. For a moment, Izuku laughed at the idea that he'd applied to Yui before he ever started All Might's workout plan, because he definitely would have died. Even Bakugo had a better physique back then. Then again, Bakugo had a better physique compared to mostly anyone. A song scratch caught him unaware, prompting him to turn towards Yaoyorozu and her talking with Jairu. Jairu caught him glancing and arched an eyebrow, at which he managed a shaky wave and a smile. While everyone headed towards the cafeteria, Jairu caught up to him. Something the matter, Midoriya? Izuku blushed and scrubbed his head as Uraraka and Ida shot a glance towards them. No. I'm worried about Yaoyorozu-san. Jairu narrowed her eyes at him. Worried? Why? The punk girl crossed her arms. Izuku yelped. It's hard to explain. My quirk? Jairu rolled her eyes. Always your quirk. Whatever. Could you show me? What? But last time... Midoriya moved his hands, trying his hardest not to talk about it but desperately wishing she understood. Jairu glanced away, then settled on looking over towards Yaoyorozu. I was kind of rude last time. Plus, if it's Yamamo, I want to know what's going on. Izuku tugged his curls and shuffled forward in line. He'd gotten close to controlling the volume last time. Maybe he could manage it, but showing someone else's song to someone. I don't really feel comfortable just prying into someone's song without their say-so. I was going to ask, could you? He glanced back and forth between Jiraiya and Yaoyorozu, trying to ignore the burn in his cheeks. Jiraiya smirked. You can't talk to her yourself? No one in this class likes me much, Jiraiya-san. I'd rather not initiate contact. She'll just get more nervous, Izuku groaned. Jiraiya's smirk fell, and her eyes fell to the floor. Fine. Does after-school work? I'll wait before I head to the gym. Izuku nodded. That works. Sparring with Ida and Uraraka, right? How's that going? Jiraiya raised her eyebrows. It's an experience. Izuku muttered. Jiraiya wrapped her fingers on his shoulder. For someone who acts like paper, you're built more like a rock than I'd expect. Izuku turned red and stammered something of a reply but found himself unable to talk as they shuffled through the rest of the line. Jiraiya grinned as she headed off to Yaoyorozu's table. Uraraka and Ida waved her off, then stared at Izuku. He buried himself in the meal and decided it was better that they didn't know for a while yet. That yet worried him even more. Being alone with Jiraiya and Yaoyorozu was nerve-wracking. It turns out Yaoyorozu was taller than him, which was a bit much. Especially next to Jiraiya. And her song wasn't anything like what he'd thought it was. For a moment after they shook hands, Izuku just lost himself in it. The cracks in Yaoyorozu's song were obvious, but there was so much more. A woman sang out in languages Izuku couldn't even begin to understand, somehow singing 3 or 4 languages at once. The peaks could have shattered glass and the bass notes, despite the voice definitely being female, hit deep enough to shake Izuku's bones. Books flew through the air overhead, pages fluttering softly in the background. Somehow a cold wind blew through the song, wheezing through the verses and setting things just a little more off. High heels and shuffling, as if others danced to the vocals, moved in a space behind the song, but the footsteps shuffled through water and splashed at odd times. Izuku thought of a ship, a sinking ship, and a ballroom, staring as the passengers grimly danced and watched the flood creep over their ankles. Cracks, like slowly freezing glass, occasionally broke the song, and every few minutes the singer would lose her place, only to start again in some other place. Oi, Midoriya! Izuku yelped as Jiraiya swatted him on the head. What the hell? Who invites a lady to talk and then stares at her? Get it together. Jiraiya-san. Oh Yaoyorozu. Oh my god, I'm so sorry, it was just my quirk, and then the cracking and... Another swat came in the middle of his rant. Geez, you're almost as bad as Kaminari. Izuku blushed furiously as Jiraiya turned to Yaoyorozu. Sorry, Yamamo. I don't even know the kid, actually, why am I apologizing? Izuku took a deep breath, then bowed his head. I'm sorry for asking you here, Yaoyorozu-san. I wanted to ask you something. Some things, actually. He trailed off beneath her stare. Yaoyorozu had gone through a few expressions in several minutes, and at the moment confusion was the most obvious of them. She hesitated but nodded. I'm surprised you asked me here, but Kyuka-chan said it was something to do with your quirk. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't curious. You and me both? Izuku muttered. He forced a nervous smile and took a breath. Well, the thing is, I'd like to help, before we all go into the sports festival. The girls stared at him. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. Midoriya-san, I don't understand. Yaoyorozu muttered. How would your quirk help? Jiraiya-san didn't. Izuku glanced at the shorter girl, who just shrugged. I barely remember any of it anyways. No point in telling. I still don't understand, Yaoyorozu murmured, glancing back and forth between them. Izuku steeled himself. This is for her. For your classmates, your friends? Maybe friends. Possible friends. People who aren't trying to kill you yet. Izuku reminded himself. I'd like this part kept kind of, quiet? I've never told anyone before. But my quirk, well, I hear emotions. And history and conditions of people. All in sound form. Right. The girls nodded. Izuku glanced around the empty room at the closed door, then sighed. Most people don't realize it. But things like trauma or insecurity, they manifest as well. For a moment, the girls didn't say anything. Izuku thought it was just misunderstanding, but soon Yaoyorozu's expression fell and she turned her eyes to the floor. I see. So you singled me out because… Izuku's eyes widened. No, wait please. He stammered. Yaoyorozu glanced up at him, all while Jiraiya muttered something about stabbing him under her breath. I want to help because I think my quirk may be able to, but I wanted you to know. I don't like just listening to people's songs and making assumptions or saying things randomly. So, well, I'd like you to listen to what I hear. And maybe you can, I don't know, understand it? Hearing it doesn't make it easier. But sometimes it can be soothing to hear, for some people, and I thought that maybe if we talked about something, I can be a good listener, or you could know more so you could talk to someone else. A real friend, not some random stranger who doesn't know you. They stared at him for several minutes. Izuku turned redder by the moment. After a little bit, Jiraiya cleared her throat. That happened. Yamamo. Yaoyorozu had to peel her eyes from Izuku to look at Jiraiya, who was sitting on the desk Yaoyorozu was seated at. Kyuka-chan. I think I get what he's talking about, and I think you should do it. He's a mess. Jiraiya glanced at Izuku, and he felt the desire to help people slowly shriveling inside his gut as the urge to throw up took over, but his quirk is serious. If he thinks it will help, I think it's worth a shot. This is certainly very out of the ordinary. Midoriya-kun, what is your quirk, exactly? Could you describe it to me completely? Yaoyorozu didn't quite frown. Izuku decided it was how a lady would frown, with all the emotion and attitude of a frown save for the frown itself. Soul Song allows me to listen to a musical manifestation of a person's emotional, mental, and physical state. That's the description, but it's more of a summary, not just a state. Most of it is in the present, but everyone is affected by the past, so I get sort of a summary? I guess. He managed weakly. That is extremely odd. How were you able to destroy a building with that? Yaoyorozu pet her head to one side. Jiraiya raised her eyebrows. Izuku laughed nervously. I can hear my own song, you know? So, I get a power-up when I'm in combat by turning my song up really high. Right now I can only do so much, but if I'm not careful I'll break myself. Izuku really hated lying about his quirk so often. I suppose that makes sense. Yaoyorozu murmured. Jiraiya laughed. Nothing about his quirk makes sense. It's fine. Well, I don't see how it could hurt. Yaoyorozu frowned. I won't deny I've been feeling a bit worried about the festival. How I'll stack up against the others. My quirk, it's not. Yaoyorozu-san. Izuku surprised them all with a calm voice, reaching out a hand. I can show you how incredible your quirk is, if you'd like. Jiraiya-san is here, though. She can hear. After what I've heard of your power, I think I'll want someone to discuss this with later. Yaoyorozu smiled at them. Jiraiya smirked. Afterwards, play mine. I want to hear it again, and showing Yamamo will make us even. This is really kind of a personal thing, so just to make sure you're not taking this lightly, Izuku began. Midoriya-kun, please. I'd like to try, if you think it will help. Yaoyorozu nodded at him. Izuku swallowed, suddenly feeling his throat was very dry. The girls took his hand, and Izuku closed his eyes. Jiraiya was sensitive to noise, which meant feeling. Careful adjustment. Give me a moment. To make sure Jiraiya-san doesn't get hurt again. He felt a nod from them, and some nervousness from both. Slowly, he let his quirk seep out of his body and create a bubble of sound. Careful to keep his own song muted, he drew the girls into his quirk and opened their ears to the world. Drawing people in felt as if he was letting them slide towards him, not pulling or pushing but pressing outwards with a muscle he didn't technically have. Thinking of his quirk as a muscle was odd. Kyuka felt. The buzz returned and nervously twisted the jack in her free hand. She had not forgotten the last time they tried this. Chaos. Drowning in an ocean of people. Midoriya was dangerous, but at the same time he was as harmless as a kitten. She wondered if she'd ever figure him out. Just as she was about to ask if he was all right, she felt something. Distantly, music began to play, but it was so much more than music. Her mind was drawn towards the sound, and gradually it rose to greet her. Kyuka wasn't in a classroom anymore. Her hands still clasped Midoriya's and Yamamo's, but Yamamo was on stage, dressed in a stunning evening gown and singing a song that Kyuka would never be able to understand. Vaguely, as she listened, she realized there was a dead spot coming from Midoriya. No sound escaped him, even though she could feel something distantly familiar throbbing in her chest. She turned to Yamamo, and suddenly understood why Midoriya had offered this at all. Yamamo was a stunning woman, smart and talented in every way. People were never so cut and dry. No one was perfect. Kyuka was sinking, listening to a song that played on impossible scales and hit notes that she'd never dreamed of. Voices rang, each one singing too many verses and never signing the right harmony to the others. It made her head throb as visions of sketches and notes and designs flooded her mind, thrown at her like a sheaf of papers. Dozens of strings and keystrokes accompanied her songs, all played well but never quite perfect. Overhead books fluttered like birds and left their own papery background noise, but several were losing pages. Each page caused the music to slip, and the occasional cracking noise throughout the entire song made Kyuka flinch every time she heard it. Somehow, despite the beauty and the depth of the music, Yaoyorozu's song was attacking itself. Trying to sing too loudly, trying to move to grab the books. Even though those things shouldn't have been sounds, Kyuka heard them clear as day. And beneath it all, the chill of the windows of an empty study, the lingering frost of a cold shoulder, and those same ding assumptions Kyuka barely ever saw herself. The same assumptions she'd made about Yamamo. Warmth radiated from the song, but it was tired and fighting off the cold. Surrounded by so many apathetic dancers, she couldn't keep it up. Her song cracked under the strain of the ice and the reaching out. Missed notes and scratches in the background were starting to give Kyuka a headache, when finally, the noise began to recede. An ache began to form in her chest. Before they could pull away, another song came to them. Kyuka knew this one. She walked through memories with a bittersweet smile as the song played, but she wondered, what do they see of me? Kyuka pulled herself from the memories and floated on the music alone. Her voice, perfectly suited to a low-lit club, rang through the room like smoke. In the background, jazz played quietly, though for the moment her song was sobering. Said even. All the same the music played on, and Kyuka felt the ache in her chest become a solid throb. It wasn't perfect. The song was quiet and shy. Music played slowly, pronounced and perfect but humming just like the ache in her chest. Slowly her song faded, leaving a very exhausted-looking Yamamo and a very quiet Midoriya. Yaoyorozu's voice cracked, and she hurriedly cleared her throat. That was very powerful. Midoriya-kun. Yaoyorozu-san, may I show you one more thing? Kyuka frowned. Midoriya didn't look like the scared little boy who'd been shuffling around their school. This was the boy who'd brought them together during USJ. He'd defeated Bakugo through sheer force of will and destroyed a zero-pointer to save Uraraka. He heard everyone's soul crying out and decided to help when he saw someone hurting. Yes, I suppose. Yamamo nodded, looking about as drained as possible. Kyuka definitely understood. Only a few minutes had passed, but it felt like so much more. Sound bloomed at the back of their mind, and this time, Kyuka couldn't understand it at all. There was so much happening that she couldn't. Midoriya took a deep breath. The vertigo she'd felt in the beginning came back full force, and suddenly Kyuka felt as if she were actually falling. Static noise silenced, dropping her straight into a void of nothing. Kyuka never remembered closing her eyes, but there she was. Soft keystrokes blossomed out of the emptiness, followed by an equally soft string. As the music played, a pair of voices began to ring out in the darkness, tinted by smiles and laughter. The song grew louder, and Kyuka felt herself be swept up in it. Yamamo stood with her, hands held tight and a hand on the small of her back. Both of their voices wound around them in a double helix, creating a harmony that shouldn't have been. Faint red light and vibrant blue blended to a rich purple behind her eyelids as the music bloomed into the song it was supposed to be. In her chest, she felt Yamamo's heartbeat pulsing in time with her own as they swayed to their song. Their song, Kyuka realized. Despite the illusion and the music, Kyuka couldn't help but listen for the third part. A part that should have been there but wasn't. Emptiness came from the third member of their group, as if the sound died the moment it got close. Something reverberated in her soul, but it was too faint even for her ears to pick up. After several minutes, Midoriya drew back and gave them a strained smile. Yamamo beamed at him, then up at Kyuka. Kyuka yelped as the taller girl stood and drew her into a hug. I don't have the words, the taller girl whispered. Kyuka smiled and rubbed Yamamo's back. Midoriya stood up and grabbed his bag. Yaoyorozu-san. They glanced at him. Before he looked away, Kyuka thought he was sad, despite the smile on his face. If you're feeling down, you should turn to your friends. It's what we've got classmates and friends for, after all. Songs are so much more beautiful when there's more than one person singing. Yaoyorozu tried to say something, it seemed, but her words didn't come out, and they watched him leave the room quietly. Is he really our age? Yamamo breathed, staring at the door. Kyuka frowned. He really doesn't make any goddamn sense. Kyoka muttered. A flush ran up her